We are live, and let's see, everything looks good on my side. So, this is later than I had originally intended to stream in general, let alone this particular stream. So, first I was unavailable, then a power outage took out the time that I would be available, so we're back a little later than I wanted to be, but you know what? Better late than never. So, been a busy couple of weeks over here, to be fair, so probably for the best that I didn't worry too much, but what we have in store for us tonight is another React night. So we've got a couple that were viewer requested, a couple that are ones that I picked out that I thought would be interesting. So we've got a viewer requested one talking about fitting a game into a single N64 cartridge. So I'll be curious to hear about the technical aspects therein. We've got something I picked out because I saw this show up in my feed and thought, oh, this should be fun. And then we've got something from another regular talking that's more a matter of character and character design, which, even if I don't spend a lot of time with Overwatch, I thought could be interesting. And a bit of gaming history as well. So, especially with Dispatch coming out, I think it's been a year or so at this point, trying to recreate the Telltale formula, might be worth looking back to see what exactly Telltale was about and what may have led to it eventually dissolving. So, we'll go ahead and take a look at all of that. And if we got time, we'll see if we can add anything more to the list. So, for now, is there anything I need to see to in chat? Let's see. Thoughts on Sony killing discs and the Microsoft layoffs? The former, well, I mean, neither of them are necessarily unexpected, but both are unfortunate. I guess for the former, with Sony getting rid of physical versions, that removes the primary draw that a lot of console games had in my eyes, where with Nintendo stuff, even if I can't necessarily download it on Steam and have it just available whenever, and even if I can't make a local copy on my computer, copy the files, find a way to crack the DRM if Steam were to go down, even if I don't have that freedom on a console, at least I have the physical version where it's mine forever. With Sony taking away the physical option, I feel that reduces one of the main reasons for why you would get a console over a PC. So I'll be curious to see how much it backfires, especially on their first party stuff. I know there was a statistic going around that most of their game sales are digital, but that being offset by the fact that most of the games released on PlayStation are digital. So it'll be a bunch of third party indies and whatnot. So, and you'll have stuff that's multi-platform like Fortnite as well. So I'll be curious to see how it ends up working out in the grand scheme of things, but I don't anticipate it going well for them, at least with the direction they're shown. As for Xbox, it's unfortunate, but given that they've been operating with very little overhead before now, and have been churning out games that have not, well, they've been, I mean, let me put it this way. I'm trying to think. So, how many games has Bethesda put out, for instance? How many games has Obsidian put out that were critically acclaimed? Well, to be fair, they've had Grounded 2, and I can't remember that odd point-and-click thing in medieval times, but Avowed has struggled, Outer Worlds 1 and 2 have struggled. It does not surprise me that the hammer is coming down in the manner it has, especially with how especially with how poorly Halo has been doing lately. We'll see what kind of last-ditch effort ends up being concocted with Halo Combat Evolved, though honestly, news on that has completely dropped off of my radar. Though, to be fair, the Sony news and the layoffs overall have been a major point of contention. And then it being included in that, yeah. Unfortunate, because it's one of the few. I know there's been a lot of discussion on that, though I've only played Doom 2016 and the original, so I'm not the person to ask about what kind of effect that'll have, since that we don't know too much beyond that. So, an unfortunate circumstance, but not entirely unexpected. They killed Tango Gameworks despite the massive praise. Well, that was the thing. Honestly, if they were to focus more so on taking the smaller risks like Hi-Fi Rush, I think they'd be doing fine. Though, all in due time, I suppose, right? We'll see where they end up going with that. Although, Nintendo's output hasn't been super quick either lately. Or, though that you could argue that's because they've also been focused on getting the Switch 2 editions of stuff added in. So that would draw attention away. So, Although, we are still getting Xenoblade Genesis, and Monolith Soft has been pushing out Switch 2 editions of basically everything in the Xenoblade series, so we'll see what happens. Well, it'll be interesting to watch things go forward, though I've got a lot I need to worry about, so I can't necessarily keep a pace of everything going on, although I'll probably see it on my feed at some point. Either way, anything else I need to worry about? Let's see, the MVG video, though, is a bit out of date. There is a sequel. Which one is that? Oh, this one? There's a sequel to it. Well, 5 years ago. Well, we'll see what it has to say for itself in the moment then. So, hello Gray, how you doing? Alrighty, we'll go ahead and get started then. As always, please let me know how the audio volume is. It can be hard to tell from my side outside of just looking at the waveforms.
If you ask me what my favourite title in the Resident Evil franchise is, it's Resident Evil 2. For me, it's one of those sequels that is better than the original in almost every way. Resident Evil 2 follows the story of Leon Kennedy and Claire Redfield as they attempt to escape Raccoon City during a zombie outbreak. For the game, Capcom wanted Resident Evil to contain more movie elements in both story and atmosphere, and the tension is just at the right level. The enemies that you will encounter are memorable, and you'll never...
Alright, so doing the usual introduction to make sure we've got everything understood as far as why you like it and all that fun stuff. So, alright, we'll let you carry on.
Know what's waiting for you around the corner.
Yep, and that was the benefit of the old fixed camera angle, even if some people struggle with tank controls in the modern day. But yeah, that was the benefit of having the fixed camera, where you would get jump scared unintentionally or otherwise by stuff just being there.
The music by composer Masamu Ueda is incredible, suspenseful, mysterious and unnerving. Resident Evil 2 stands as one of the best survival horror games ever made, and it's no surprise that Capcom remade the game in 2019. Released originally for the Sony PlayStation, the game came on 2 CDs with 2 separate characters to play through as.
Okay, now I'm seeing where the technical problems would arise, because if you're having to break up a game into multiple CDs, back then that was a big deal. So, it would vary depending on the game. I guess to put things into perspective, Knights of the Old Republic, if you got the CD version instead of the DVD version, I think it took something like 3 or 4 discs, and you saw similar size constraints even with Baldur's Gate 2 back in the day. That took 4 CDs, all unto its own. My dad still has his original CDs of those. I wonder if they work. I'm okay, thanks for asking yourself. Well, difficult last couple of weeks, but that's over now. I get to focus on bigger and better things, for better or worse. Let's see.
Each character has 2 scenarios which can be unlocked when you complete the game the first time round. These scenarios unlocks events from the other character's perspective. The game was a smash hit. It sold...
Huh, interesting. I'll have to go check that out. I believe it's on GOG, so we'll have to go double check that. Interesting.
380,000 copies during opening weekend and grossed $19 million.
Back then, that was stellar, yeah.
The game would also see ports to other systems, notably the Sega Dreamcast, Nintendo GameCube, and the Nintendo 64.
Now here comes the fun part.
If there's one port that stands out as truly the most impressive port of the game to various systems, it undoubtedly has to be the Nintendo 64 version. Released almost 2 years from the original PlayStation 1 version, Resident Evil 2 on the Nintendo 64 is a technical masterpiece. Somehow, the entire game, with both Leon and Claire's gameplay, including full motion video movies, music and audio, were all compressed down to fit in a 64 megabyte cartridge.
64 megabyte? Jeez. I mean, even for an old game, that's... oof. I got Final Fantasy VIII for the PS1 with 4 CDs. Yeah, there's a lot that you try and shove in. Also, hi Lou, how you doing? Sorry to hear that. I'm glad it's over now, and I hope things get better for you. Well, it'll take a while, but we'll talk more about that towards the end, because that'll affect output over here. Either way, let's carry on.
This was achieved by Angel Studios, a team of 9 developers with a budget of $1 million. 2 CDs totaling 1.2 gigabytes of data was compressed to fit on a single Nintendo 64.
1.2 gigs to 64. Jeez.
64 cartridge. The video files in particular have a compression rate of 165 to 1, yet in a vacuum they look perfectly serviceable. It's only when you put them against the PlayStation 1 version that you notice that some sacrifices were made. What's also interesting about the...
Well, I mean, you'll see differences in the lighting and whatnot, but for the most part, yeah, that's shockingly good. Well, that is shockingly well maintained. Damn.
Nintendo 64 is that there's no dedicated video decoding hardware for full motion video. It was all done in software. Unlike the PlayStation 1.
Oh. So wait, is that where the video came? So did they do pre-render? Hang on, let me hear that again. Actually, since that we're doing this as a live reaction, so let's make sure that we've got subtitles on in case I miss something.
About the Nintendo 64 is that there's no dedicated video decoding hardware for full motion video. It was all done in software.
Okay, so actually that may inadvertently help them in order to compress it down. Instead of having the static video files, they can't necessarily be changed, but can maintain a consistent frame rate and yada yada yada. If it's running in-engine, that actually, in theory, makes it a little easier to manage, because then you just have to manage the relative position and let the rendering software, let the graphics renderer handle things for you. Okay, I'm seeing how they make this work. Excuse me.
Unlike the PlayStation 1, which has dedicated movie decoding hardware, the Nintendo 64 has no such thing. But thanks to clever utilization of the RSP and custom microcode, meant that full motion video was actually possible on the N64. Full motion video on the N64 wasn't exclusive to only Resident Evil 2. In fact, Pokemon Puzzle League, which came out before Resident Evil 2, has a 30-second FMV intro, which looked as good as anything that you would see on the Sony PlayStation.
To come and see me in my office in Puzzle League Village!
Yeah!
Did you hear me, Ash?
Eager to prove themselves in this new type of Pokemon battle,
Huh. Fascinating.
Ash and Pikachu race to Pokemon Puzzle League Village.
There it is, Pikachu! Are you ready for another new challenge? Pikachu!
But
Are we?
Resident Evil 2 was a different animal, where
I'm surprised that didn't get you content ID'd. Nintendo was vicious back then. Actually, it was 5 years ago, so it started to loosen up around the Switch era, so fair enough.
talking
But even then, anime-related stuff tends to get you claimed pretty quick.
about 15 minutes of full motion video that ran natively on the PlayStation 1 at 320 by 160 pixels at 24-bit color. Uncompressed, this would require about 4 gigabytes.
Yup.
With no dedicated decompression hardware, meant that any compressed video format would require code to be written in software. Furthermore, the developers would only have 24 megabytes of 64 megabytes allocated for the FMV. The approach was to utilize compression, and a technique known as chroma subsampling took advantage of perception traits in humans, that we are more susceptible to brightness and contrast changes over color itself. If we
Okay. I can see where they're going with this. Alright. Interesting. Yeah, because when you're trying to learn how to draw, contrast is the main thing that we focus on, so yep, let's see his example.
We consider these 4 images. The rightmost one has no subsampling. The furthest left has horizontal resolution reduced by a quarter of the original, and bandwidth is also halved. At a quick glance, all 4 of these images appear to be the same, but a closer look reveals that you can clearly see the artifacting.
Yep.
But on a CRT, with continuous moving full motion video images, these imperfections aren't as easily noticeable, and this is what the developers thought would be a suitable compression technique. With this in mind,
Actually, yeah, because with this being on a CRT, that is the thing that we often forget, is that with CRT, you effectively just have a long tube, which is why TVs back then were so, well, heavy and basically just giant boxes rather than the relatively thin monitors and TVs we have now. So you're effectively just shining a small light on a small section in order to try and get the specific color you're looking for that pixel. And because of that, it can end up looking a little blurry to an extent when you actually get it on the video. So you'll see CRT filters applied to stuff, especially if you have the Sega Mega Drive and Genesis classics, and among other things that try and have a CRT filter, and it's interesting to look at as well when you compare sprites for stuff like Shining Force or a Sonic game or pretty much anything from that day, where the sprites look really odd now, but back when it was on a CRT, because you get that slight blurring, it didn't look nearly as well. It would actually look relatively good, even by modern standards. So it's interesting to think about on that sense, where even with emulation, there's a degree to which, because we don't have CRT monitors, we can't quite recreate that old look.
A tool to compress the video images was developed, but even with the chroma subsampling technique, the video size would still end up being too large.
Yep.
The next idea was to reduce the bitrate, but reducing the bitrate meant that the quality of the video would be subpar.
Yeah, and presumably he's doing this as an example to show what kind of effect that could have, which, fair enough.
Increasing the bitrate was desired, but it simply exceeded storage requirements. This was not ideal, but thanks to the Nintendo 64 custom hardware and a few tricks up its sleeve, it was one of the earliest consoles to support vectors, and with the reality signal processor custom chip, meant that it could run code in parallel. With this in mind, the resolution of the movies were internally reduced, and then scaled back up thanks to some custom microcode that would handle this resolution scaling with a almost zero performance hit.
Huh. Interesting. So, effectively, okay, so they weren't rendering it in engine, so they were effectively just doing an early version of upscaling? Huh. And with CRTs, you wouldn't necessarily notice the artifacting either, so, fascinating.
The color space conversion after the code was decompressed back to RGB for the Nintendo 64's frame buffer was also rewritten to make use of the reality signal processor, and thanks to Nintendo 64's unique architecture meant that the RGB data was simply rendered directly to the frame buffer without any memory or caching.
Okay, that would help. Huh. So that would mean that performance would be relatively would not suffer nearly the same hit as it would be on a modern machine. Okay, useful.
But even with these tricks, the movie files still decompressed way too slow. With most avenues exhausted, the developer decided to compress the movie by skipping every other frame and interpolate them.
Oh geez, using literally every trick in the book, damn.
This effectively halved the movie frame rate to 15 frames per second. But to compensate, a trick was used that would utilize the RSP to swap in a new frame to simulate a triple buffering effect.
Okay, so basically the same thing so if I understand correctly, this is the same thing that you'll see when, oh, look at this movie, but in 60 FPS. That's effectively what they're doing, I believe. And we watched a video on that a long time ago of someone complaining about that very trend.
This trick would essentially apply a new frame and average it out with the current frame, which would simulate the feeling of motion without noticing. If you pause the video during certain frames, you can clearly see the average frame between the new one that's decompressed and the current one that's in the frame buffer. This trick was done with some clever microcode. With the frame rate reduced in half meant that the output file was also halved. All these techniques applied would be enough for the video file to fit in the 24 megabytes of space. The developers reduced down all textures to be more friendly with the Nintendo 64's 4 kilobytes of texture cache. You can see this with a very clear comparison between the PlayStation 1 version.
Okay, so reducing space where you can by breaking it up into smaller chunks. Okay, fair enough. That would mean more files that you would have to manage, but so long as the files themselves are smaller, that gets the same purpose. So as long as they've done proper QA, yep, that would work.
The game itself also has had some changes, notably the resolution. During gameplay, the game will bounce around in resolution internally, and if we run the game through emulation, you can notice that the resolution is changing on each scene that we load. Many people believe that the resolution is actually dynamic based on the number of enemies on the screen at one time, but this is in fact not true. All backgrounds are simple textures that are loaded in the game, and during scenes where there are more zombies on screen, this means that we won't be as focused on the backgrounds as much, and they are usually reduced in size internally. Now the Nintendo 64 will scale all textures at the same level, but this is why some backgrounds appear blurrier than others. Once again, this technique of reducing some background sizes and not others was simply done to save space. Speech in the game has also taken a hit. which has been compressed significantly over the original PlayStation 1 version.
Yeah, and this is one thing that would be very difficult to mask over, unfortunately. Because, especially when you get down to that small of a bit rate, any change that you make is going to be significantly noticeable. So it's the idea of just continuously rendering an MP3 over and over to where it ends up just sounding like utter dreck.
Leon. Sorry, but it looks like your party has been cancelled. Leon. Sorry, but it looks like your party has been cancelled.
Yeah, that sounds like it wouldn't be out of place in a Super Nintendo game for the really old audio that they tried to effectively mimic with, I think it was this, I can't remember exactly what sound systems they used back then, but I think they had specific chips that would output sound, trying to recreate stuff like that. And you'd have similar with PS1 with One Winged Angel as well.
What happened?
Like the movie files, there is a lot of speech in the game, and this would have accounted for a significant reduction in size.
Yep.
Porting over the PlayStation 1's amazing soundtrack would have been a massive challenge. The Nintendo 64 lacks a dedicated audio chip, leaving the task to the RSP, which although is highly programmable, meant that the developers would need to write their own sound engine or find one.
Oh. Ow.
Fortunately, Factor 5's Musi-X sound engine was the one that was ultimately used. Musi-X is known as the tool that would bridge the gap between CD audio and MIDI, and it was perfectly suited for the game. Musi-X could be used as a normal synth during development, so the musician didn't need to know anything about code. They could just use a Windows PC
Fascinating.
to compose their audio. But the Musi-X sound module would be converted over to the Nintendo 64 with the audio sound itself, and the result was very impressive, with no noticeable reduction in quality over the PlayStation 1.
Really? This ought to be good. Oh wow, yeah, there's barely any difference, damn. Maybe a
Musi-X
slight,
was
but
also
still.
extremely optimized on the N64, on average utilizing less than 1% of the CPU
Wait, what? How?
and less than 1% of the RSP in most cases. One
Well
question
then.
that's always remained for me is about the full motion video. We mentioned previously that Pokemon Puzzle League used FMV in its intro sequence. This codec came with the Nintendo SDK in 1998 and was known as HQVM. This was released before Resident Evil 2, and recently I've seen some examples of a full 30-minute cartoon episode which runs on a 32 megabyte ROM. If we do some simple math, surely this codec would have been suitable for Resident Evil 2, yet the developers chose to design their own codec instead. If anyone who was a part of Angel Studios knows more, please feel free to reach out. Ultimately, Resident Evil 2 on the Nintendo 64 was successful thanks to clever compression and decoding techniques, and taking advantage of Nintendo 64's custom architecture, but they also had lots of help from Nintendo themselves. You see, very few companies actually get to design custom microcode, let alone have access to a development kit. Nintendo was
yeah.
always very
Especially
secretive
back
about
then.
their microcode, but Angel Studios, with Nintendo's blessing, were able to do just that, and they also got the green light to partner and work with Factor 5 on Musi-X.
Well, to be fair, with what they were creating and what they were using, I mean, if they're able to get stuff moved over and able to get stuff on their system, that is a net benefit to them, especially with how big Resident Evil clearly was, so fair enough on that count. Let's see. All these techniques for making games back then still amaze me. Game developers back then had magic. Yeah, limitation breeds creativity, especially in the early days when computer hardware and software for that matter were not nearly as accessible as they are now, where you needed to have a good understanding of how they work if you were to own one, even if you owned something like a Windows 95 computer or what have you. Yeah, they had to find a ways to work around the limitations, pretty much.
In the end, Resident Evil 2 on the Nintendo 64 is an amazing port that shows what can be achieved with the right optimization and development. It surely goes down as another impossible port. But I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think about Resident Evil 2 on the N64? I'd be very interested to hear what you guys have to say. Well guys, we are going to leave it here for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, leave me a thumbs up and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye for now.
Alright, fascinating stuff. Thank you for recommending that. Okay, yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. Huh. Yeah, I'm glad the only limitation I'm dealing with is just time and personal resources. Although, to be fair, that's what everybody has to deal with to an extent. Either way, is there anything else I missed? I think I caught up with everything in chat. Alrighty. Fascinating topic, game optimization. The amount that you would have to put in, and then we end up bloated with respect to game costs anyway. Well, it'll work itself out in the long run. Eventually. And who knows, with all the hardware prices being driven up, they'll be forced to optimize now, so hopefully that generational talent is still around to some extent, although it may take a bit to build that back up with what hit Microsoft lately. Especially depending on who you believe as far as id Tech. Either way, for now, let's move on to the next thing, because we get to go from talking about something really old to something that really needed more time in the oven. And probably a full restart based on everything that was said. So, Metroid Prime 4. This game has been contentious since it came out. The opinion of it can be largely categorized as mixed, where on one hand, you can see a lot of potential there, from a visual and audio standpoint, really polished, really nice. And from a gameplay standpoint, there's even plenty that you can like. I personally really like the boss battles. But then you think, this is supposed to be a Metroid game, and backtracking feels like a chore because of the way that they designed their desert, and with the fact that, as a result of that desert, you can't necessarily have the same degree of intermingling with respect to the different areas. So you're backtracking, but it's effectively just a series of hallways, just with slight variations. And while there can be a lot of cool stuff going on, it can end up still being very repetitive, to where the only reason that you would have to go back to some of these areas would be to collect stuff once that you get all of the equipment. So, and I would not go so far as, with respect to this title, and say that it is the greatest disappointment in gaming history, but given how long it has been since Metroid Prime 3, between that and Metroid Prime 4, I would not blame people for having that perspective. Personally, I think there are other games that might fulfill that criteria better, but either way, we can mull over that another day. For now, what I'm curious to know, and what we've got in front of us, is Matt McMuscles, whom we've seen a couple of his videos before, where he goes into the background of a lot of stuff. And his video on Metroid Prime 1 is really good as well, where even though that game turned out immaculately, there ended up being a lot that went on behind the scenes, to where I think you can find this in dev interviews, and I remember hearing about this even before Matt McMuscles' video highlighted it, where there was a major miscommunication early on, to where the visor system, as we understand it, being able to scan or see an infrared or X-ray, almost was missed because of a difference in communication, especially since you had people from Japan talking to people over in America and vice versa, where you would have the communication lag, even with telephones back then, where you could call from the other side of the world, but at the same time, are they awake? And this is a long distance, and there is going to be the language and communication and cultural barriers too. So, fascinating stuff as far as Prime 1. I'll be very curious to see everything laid out for Prime 4, because I know bits and pieces of it, and I even covered it in my own review over on the review channel, but I'll be curious to see what it all looks like in the big picture. And more importantly, I'll be curious to see how much of this ends up being speculation or insider. Because I think there is a decent amount that they've told us, but I'd also be curious to know how much of it is just behind the scenes stuff that may or may not be accurate. And to be fair, some of the stuff that's been told publicly could be just covering one's rear, to be fair. So, let's take a look-see. And let him do his introduction. So,
Welcome back to another planet exploring and copious energy crystal absorbing episode of What Happened, the YouTube-style pop culture media show that searches for all the action within the video game and movie industries to dig up the ancient prophecies of past development cycles. And this week, we'll be scouring the depths of the barren, but also not so barren planet of Vuros to fill out our maps to chart the progress of one of Nintendo's biggest games of last year, and certainly one of the more controversial. My logbook indicates it's a twisting tale of premature announcements, false starts, developers' switcheroos, questionable design choices, and soaring expectations that proved impossible to meet.
well, yeah, it would have been impossible to meet. I will grant you. But if Prime 4 was even half as good as Prime 1, they would have been fine.
So grab the nearest missile expansion and rev up your violas as I answer the question, what happened to Metroid Prime 4 Beyond?
Samus Aran? Hey!
As we all
I'm already getting... no. I know you gotta, but thanks for reminding me why I hate the game. Well, okay, I don't hate the game. I'm not mad at it, I'm just disappointed. That's arguably worse. The character writing was literally the worst part of the game, to be fair, but...
all know Nintendo fans and those...
Oh, hang on a second. You wanna... Hang on, let me move that out of your way, Pickles. There we go. Good girl. Is this your attempt to try and get me to pay attention to you? Unfortunately, I need to talk to the internet. I'll spend time with you later.
Those that regularly pray at the feet of the almighty Samus Aran, like yours truly, collectively lost their shit when at the very tail end of Nintendo's big 2017 Summer Direct presentation,
And that would have been when the Switch was announced, right? Or, actually, no, it would have been announced sooner than that, but it was when they were trying to hype you up for said Switch, right?
announced that Metroid Prime 4 was coming, and well, that was it. Even at this very early juncture, this...
Imagine, well... Actually, we don't even have Skyrim's, well, Elder Scrolls 6 yet, do we? Think that level. It applied here, too.
was rather curious, because outside of maybe Bayonetta 3, which also had its own host of development issues, thank you, Nintendo doesn't really just show a logo and then peace out, as there's usually some footage or a snippet of gameplay to wet fanboys' whistles.
To be fair, actually, you know, you technically did the same thing with Smash Bros. Here, but to be fair, announcing that Inkling was involved certainly got people's attention.
This meant that the title was incredibly early in development, which in retrospect should have been also evident by the fact
Retro.
that even 10 years removed from the last mainline entry, this announcement was still using a very similar font and logo style as the other Prime games, and also didn't even have a subtitle, which the vast majority of Metroid games did when they were revealed. This is something...
Actually, yeah, and we've heard whispers of another one that's been, well, not announced, but apparently there was another Metroid game that might be coming down the pipeline that showed up in, I think, Brazilian Public Record or something like that. I can't remember the exact name, but worth digging into. We'll see if it ends up meaning anything in a year or two.
We've seen before in previous stories I've covered, where generating hype, while extremely important, starts working against you if you announce a product well ahead of it being ready. You know, before the world, if not the designs, have been finalized and approved. When Nintendo did...
Well, to be fair, if I remember correctly from the timing for Metroid Prime 4, I'm trying to remember, because well, it had been on hiatus for a while, if I recall correctly. Hang on, I'm going to pull up another window so I can confirm that. So, let's see. If I recall correctly, let me just get a list of Metroid games. Alright, list of Metroid games, come on. Alright, so... between the release of Metroid Other... Yes, here's why they did it. So... This is Wikipedia, so take with a grain of salt, but this was Metroid Other M's release, so shortly after the Metroid Prime trilogy. So, Metroid Other M, not well received. And then you had 6 years, and Metroid, after being absent for a very long time, relatively speaking, shows back up as Federation Force, which was heavily panned because what the hell are you doing giving us a Metroid game without Samus involved? So then we get a remake of Super Metroid, and then it still takes a long time before we even get a remaster of Metroid Prime 1. So announcing Metroid Prime 4 around here makes complete sense, where there were a lot of people who were very upset, and so they realized early on, okay, yep, we hear you, we are going to make Metroid Prime 4, so it makes sense for them to have announced it, but I mean, as we'll see, backfired heavily.
Did confirm is that Retro Studios, the developers behind the original trilogy, were not involved with this new entry, as the intention was to kick off a new storyline which, as we would find out a little bit later, was the brainchild of Kensuke Tanabe. Tanabe is a longtime Nintendo producer that's been with the company ever since the late 80s, was the director of Doki Doki Panic, obviously was the big Nintendo rep on all the major Metroid Prime titles, and most importantly of all, produced Excitebot's Trick Racing.
Okay.
Now, Tanabe really loved, and obviously still loves, Sylux, one of the mysterious bounty hunters first introduced in the Nintendo DS exclusive Metroid Prime Hunters, and who also had cheeky little cameos tucked away in later games. After the completion of one of those said games, the fan-lauded and globally cherished Metroid Prime Federation Force
That is sarcasm in case you didn't recognize it, to those who are, well, no, I'm not gonna make that joke.
Tanabe wanted to fully kick off a new saga that revolved around Sylux, placing
Which we will see what they end up doing with that, though honestly, they probably should have had him be more of a presence throughout, or at least given him more motivation. I believe that there is stuff tucked away within logs and whatnot, but still. I had a friend over about a week or so ago, and he was complaining a little bit about that. I even showed him the secret scene that you can get in the gallery after getting 100% scans on hard mode, where a matter of, hey, that explains some things, but why is this separate and then just in pieces to where you can't really tell what's going on? It's too out of context when you see it in the moment, so that's it. As far as, well, to the point where you have to effectively go wiki hunting. And this is from a guy who played Metroid Prime Hunters, too.
him as the new central antag against Samus's role as protag.
And to be fair, it would hard to beat Dark Samus given that, well, actually, Dark Samus works because she doesn't speak a whole lot and is just this imposing presence that shows up, tries to kick your ass, and comes from a final boss fight that gave you quite a bit of trouble. So there was a degree to which Dark Samus worked by just being the silent, just deadly killer. So especially given Prime 3, but I don't know if Sylux necessarily has that opportunity, since that I think he only shows up in Hunters and then as said cameos.
Tanabe first started playing with this idea seriously in 2016, but once Nintendo's own Breath of the Wild blew players and critics away in 2017 with its hitherto unseen levels of freedom and open-ended design,
Which, mixed bag as to whether that's a good thing or not.
plans started to shift to also introduce this concept to the world of Metroid.
Though, to be fair, I'm one of those weirdos who doesn't like Breath of the Wild, so take my opinion with a grain of salt. So, yeah, and then trying to translate open world to Metroid when, yeah, well, hopefully he'll talk about why that doesn't work, otherwise I'll pipe up.
And given the reaction to Breath of the Wild, who could blame them?
A lot of people, I can blame them. That is a stupid idea on the face of it. Don't make everything open world, you'll just burn out the trend before it's useful.
As for why Retro Studios was not involved initially, well, that's because they were plenty busy working on the Switch port of Tropical Freeze, as well as another then unannounced Metroid project, which is a fairly important linchpin to this entire story. There have been rumors for years that a Metroid Prime trilogy remake or remaster had been fully developed and was just sitting on a shelf for months, simply waiting to be released, but
Though this is rumor, so
that doesn't seem to have been the case, at least not fully. digging into the bowels of the internet through various forum posts and reports.
Alright, so Jeff Grubb can sometimes be accurate, but I think there have been times that he's been wrong, though I can't recall too many specifics off the top of my head.
Reports by leakers like Emily Rogers has revealed a much more accurate rundown of what was going on at Retro Studios at this point in time and how Prime 4 came to be. In lieu of a full remake or remaster of 3 very lengthy games all in one package, which when you think about it is rather insane.
I mean, yes and no. I mean, if you already have the bones in place, in theory, it should just be a glow-up of the textures and making it work with modern controls, which, to be fair, that could still be a lot of work. I mean, you look at side-by-sides of the original Prime 1 release and the Prime 1 remaster, yeah, there is a substantial glow-up, but still. In fact, it was almost jarring going back and playing a bit of the Metroid Prime trilogy on the Wii for that reason, because I got used to how nice Prime 1 remastered looks, and then I go to 2 and realize, oh yeah, 4x3. I'm not even sure that this is even 1280 by 1024. This might just be 360p. And this is stretched onto a 4... I think it was I'm trying to remember. Was that when I had set up the 4K TV in the living room? I think it was. Yeah, that sounds about right. But either way, all that to say... fun times getting all this working. So it would have been a substantial effort from a design standpoint, but I don't think it would have been as serious as he claims. Although, to be fair, I'm not in the industry in that sense.
I mean, hell, even Rockstar couldn't do it correctly.
Well, to be fair, we'll see how well Rockstar does when GTA 6 comes out. Gotta make every game open world now is the trend. Make the world's as large as Texas, then barely add anything to do in it. Yeah, that's my complaint of Breath of the Wild, unironically. Yes, I love walking through a field for a few minutes and then dying to a random guardian. I love it.
The original plan instead was for Retro Studios, along with a few smaller support teams, to develop a single, very elaborate remaster of just the original Metroid Prime, bringing up all the art and lighting effects to modern standards while retaining the same engaging gameplay. If the market responded to said title and Nintendo then gave the green light, the same TLC would then be applied to both Echoes and Corruption.
So, in theory, we should be seeing something to that effect around this time, right? Although, to be fair, they had to get pulled in to work on Prime 4 because of the reset, so who knows where that's at, but can I has? I don't have the money for it right now, but can I has anyway?
All released as separate standalone games.
Which, I mean, they only priced $40 for a Prime Remastered, so if they do the same thing that they did with Mario Galaxy 1 and 2, I'd be happy with that.
Unfortunately though, those plans, like the most well-laid, didn't really work out, and Nintendo had to call several audibles that has led us all to this very episode of What Happened Today.
Yep.
With Retro Studios obviously occupied throughout both 2016 and 2017, Nintendo entered a partnership with Namco, who they already had a tight relationship with thanks to their multiple collabs on the likes of the Smash Bros. Series, to helm this new chapter of Metroid Prime.
Yep, and in theory it would have worked the same way with, instead of Masahiro Sakurai spearheading it, you'd have the guy behind Metroid spearheading it, so in theory it would have worked really dang well, but let's hear more details.
One of Namco's Japanese teams and a newly established one in Singapore would share development duties, with some employees having come from LucasArts and the ill-fated Star Wars 1313.
Really? Fascinating.
Obviously, said teams had zero experience with Metroid, but it was still...
Well, still, if you have experience... Well, to be fair, if they wanted experience with open world, if I remember correctly, 1313 was going to be a Boba Fett story set in Coruscant, well, the Coruscant underworld at the time, so that would have been... Yeah, that would have been ideal to pull from, so... Fair enough on that count, though, as we'll discuss. I mean, yeah, shouldn't have gone the open world route, but we'll let him say it.
Still an exciting prospect that the series would be given an injection of new blood. However, this new blood seemed to struggle with what both Nintendo and Tanabe wanted to see out of the series, with the most commonly cited major issue being that Namco couldn't seem to create compelling level designs that were up to Nintendo's standards.
And that would have been an impossible task, because how do you translate the very maze-like and very deliberate level design? How do you merge that with open world? Short answer, you can't. Or rather, if you're going to, you have a Herculean effort to do so. You could stick literally the best developers on the planet in the same room, and I'd still see them struggle, I suspect.
Now, if you're talking about a platformer or an action game, level designs can sometimes be changed or expanded without much issue. But when you're talking about something like
Yep, here we are. And this right here, perfect example of it. Just, I think you might have pulled, I think I know the website that you pulled this from too. One of the guide spots where you've got all of these interlinking spots. I believe, let's see, I think this is, let's see, where's the, I'm trying to remember exactly where the starting point is. I think it's over here. Yeah, Talon Overworld North. So this is the starting point. And this is what, well, the first room that you end up in the Chozo Ruins. And this was my example when talking through why Prime 4 struggled in the level design department, where you had this central room that you would come back to all the time, which Prime 4 also had rooms that you would, or areas that you would come back to all the time. But the difference was, even as you were coming back to this multiple times, you were oftentimes going in different directions in order to reach different parts, whether it be a section over here, a section over here. And as you're passing through, you realize, oh, I have this new toy. I hear noise coming from this tree that's over here. What if I blast it? Oh, there's a missile here. Or, oh, I have the boost ball after dealing with some stuff over here. And I can't remember exactly what the boost ball itself is, but there's Morph Ball. So, oh, I have boost ball now. Oh, right, it's in Fendrana. So I have boost ball now, I can go grab this. Or, oh, I have grapple now, I can go grab this. And so you're coming back to the same point, but you're able to access more stuff as you go. So that's what really makes it work as far as level design, where you're retreading, but you're retreading while also seeing to new things that you wouldn't have been able to do in the first place. And that's what Prime 4 was missing.
Metroid that has featured tons of iconic environments that were all meticulously crafted and interconnected, you can start to see how Nintendo would lose confidence in the team that had been put together, especially for a series that hadn't seen a new console entry in over 10 years. Thus, in January of 2019, roughly 2 years into the project, Nintendo manager Shinya Takahashi announced that the development of Metroid Prime 4 under Namco was being suspended, the duties passing over to Retro Studios, and that Tanabe was obviously being retained. This, as you can imagine, was both a worry and a relief to many fans that had been waiting for Samus's comeback to a Nintendo home console.
Yep, and he'll pro through it. Yep, self-explanatory for the most part why it would be both a relief and concern, so I'll let him say it.
Retro's return to the franchise, but being concerned as to why Nintendo and Namco couldn't work things out. In the years following this announcement, reports and rumors started circulating that Retro Studios had put together some type of demo or pitch that had been put in front of Tanabe and other Nintendo higher-ups, in the hopes that they would snag the job to lead on Metroid Prime 4. This was the rumor at the time, but
I believe this is where he goes, but... Oh, interesting. I wonder who this is from. I don't usually comment on these things, but given there's been a lot of irresponsible reporting around this project, so that's led to a lot of misconceptions, and I am, in my opinion, undeserved negativity, I want to clear up a couple of things here. As the cat's out of the bag now, and I'm not sure who that is, has already broken the news, I figure it can't do anything but help. First off, though, I don't know whether or not this is being announced in the Direct today. I was expecting it to be announced in the E3 Direct, but when they announced Dread instead, I assumed they were going to hold off on this announcement until after Dread released. So I'd be surprised if they talk about it today, but if they do, then that's great, because I've been waiting for this to be announced for years now. Just so people understand what this is and what this isn't, I just want to clear up the history here so people can make accurate judgments about this project and whether it's worth their money. To start, most every rumor that's supposedly leaked about Retro the last several years has been complete bullshit. Oh boy. Something about them doing Star Fox. Oh my god, what?
In a 2021 post from a vetted user named Belmont, it seems that this wasn't entirely accurate.
doing Star Fox? What?
and instead presented a much more likely scenario given what we know now in 2026. Since Retro were only actively working on remasters circa 2019, this left their few engineers and designers with precious little to do for the foreseeable future. Because, if you recall, the original plan was to remaster Prime 1, 2, and then 3 in standalone releases, so that was a resource that wasn't being properly utilized. So, to help alleviate the level design struggles Namco is having, a small team from Retro was brought on to assist them sometime in 2018, and that's when it occurred to Nintendo management that maybe the entire project should be developed in-house by them. But the problem was that Retro was simply not staffed up properly to take on an entirely new, elaborate game by themselves.
Yes, and that's what I heard as well, that I don't know the exact staffing concerns, maybe he'll go into that. I had heard whispers that the staff at Retro at the time weren't really well equipped to handle another Metroid Prime, at least at that time, though I didn't know much about the veracity of it, and it seemed odd to me that that would be the case. Although, to be fair, if you're working on Donkey Kong Country and then bringing it over to Switch, alongside doing a few other small things, I guess that would make a degree of sense, though I'd be curious to know why Retro got, for lack of a better word, downgraded to support studio at that, well, for that long. Though, to be fair, downgraded in the sense of, hey, here's a remaster of something cool, so who knows?
At least not yet. So, if the Morph Ball was to be picked up by them and carried into the Chozo end zone, everyone involved knew it would take a lot of additional time, as not only did Retro and Tanabe need to reconnect and get up to speed on his new vision, they needed to swell up their ranks with even more artists, programmers, and designers,
And at that point, is it really the same studio that made the Prime trilogy working on it?
which again was something that wasn't going to happen overnight. In fact, for several years, the only Metroid Prime 4 crumbs Nintendo fans could scrape up from off the floor was the occasional update to someone's LinkedIn or Retro posting about an open position. But just like Samus inconveniently losing all her powers at the worst possible time, the COVID-19 pandemic, which kicked off its worldwide tour just a year later, obviously put a serious damper on things. And so Retro, we need to painstakingly fight through it until development started running smoothly again.
Okay, yeah, and especially in the early days, trying to get the overall direction sorted. Okay, yeah, that would be a major disruptor.
Tanabe himself outlined all the pandemic-related challenges they faced in a December 2025 interview after the release of Prime 4, revealing that Nintendo's regular in-person trips to all their partners working on projects were obviously all postponed.
Which then means that you can't necessarily get people up to speed as quickly as you like, especially given the circumstances. Although, I wonder how difficult it would have been to move him out into this, well, stateside temporarily. Although, I don't know if that's even something you would necessarily want. I mean, you would have to deal with Austin, Texas, and speaking from experience, no, it's not that bad. It's fine. It's very similar to where I live, actually, but still, I gotta make fun of it, right? I am from there, after all.
Said meetings having to then be conducted online, and with only one interpreter on hand.
Okay, at this point, if you've been working for Nintendo this long, how is that possible? Come on.
Which meant meetings would sometimes last for several hours.
And then, which means everybody is going to be impatient or wanting to just get this done, and then, yeah, I feel bad for that interpreter. Why would you just have one if you've been working with Nintendo this long?
Everyone else, though, those hours stretched into years as Metroid Prime 4 entered a long period of silence, specifically from early 2019 all the way to mid-2024.
To be fair, we did have Dread during this time, but still.
But even when it was re-revealed, the quick trailer that Nintendo debuted, which also featured the new subtitle of Beyond, really didn't give too much away or answer many of the questions fans had.
Arguably that's a good thing, but either way. What's Chapman up to? New idea, open world sweatshop factories? Why? Why do I bother reading chat?
Tanabe explained that during those 4 long years, the game entered a deep period of trial and error, with many of its design tenets coming directly from him, which was a change from previous Prime games of the past. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was getting a lot of praise for adopting an open world format. Following that, I kept seeing comments online saying, I want to try playing an open world Metroid.
Those people are stupid and should not have been listened to. Yes, I am being mean.
However, Metroid's core concept of acquiring new abilities to expand the explorable space contradicts the go anywhere you want from the start structure of open worlds.
Exactly.
Even so, I wondered, was there a way to meet these demands if only in a limited area? I also thought that being able to exhilaratingly ride a bike through that area could add some variety to the pacing of Metroid's gameplay.
It did add some variety to the pacing by briefly slowing it down to a freaking crawl with how it was implemented.
Which is usually all about claustrophobia and tension.
I wouldn't say claustrophobia. Who's described Metroid as claustrophobic? I'd describe it as carefully crafted first, huh?
However, when I later saw Link riding a bike in Breath of the Wild's DLC,
why?
My reaction was, no! Now people will think I stole that idea! And I wasn't sure what to do.
Scrap it and start over!
But then I thought, no, I'm not copying them. And besides, Samus riding a bike is definitely cool.
I mean, I won't deny that Samus getting her own bike would be really nice if it were literally in the other game. Okay, now I'm just being needlessly mean. I'm gonna shut up now.
And so, without further hesitation, I decided to make this bike a reality.
Okay, I'm not gonna shut up that long, but still.
That, and the inclusion of more talkative Galactic Federation friendlies, and the desire to cap off the story with a more morose final ending, were all
that they undercut by trying to do a sacrifice play before they did the actual one. Literally the worst thing you could have done. You would have been, I get wanting to make it feel desperate and like you're constantly being hunted, but then actually commit, you...
all things Tanabe himself had been pushing for even during the early Namco days, so
did you have to make him that annoying though?
he definitely knew what he wanted.
What do you want? Okay, yeah, I should stop being mean. Ugh. This game could have been so good, but instead we got this.
The only problem? These were many of the same things that both the press and the Metroid fandom would fire their missiles of ire at when
I mean, here I am.
The game finally did release.
Exactly. Miles McKenzie pissing everyone off. Honestly, I've already said my piece on that in my review of the game, but short version then, it wasn't as bad as I expected, but it was still bad. They treated they were written like they were straight out of a millennial, they were written like millennials, to where it felt insincere, to where a decent amount of the dialogue from Mackenzie especially felt insincere and just a bit too lackadaisical, for lack of a better term. And then they also treated the audience like an idiot by saying things, oh, did you know that missiles will do more to creatures that have a hard shell? I didn't need to know that. I've got a perfectly good way to kill those already. Why are you still talking? Why do I need this tutorial when I'm playing through this again on hard mode?
Now, if you thought Tanabe's desire to inject open-world design directly into Metroid's typical MO of tightly designed biomes and morph ball tunnels all interconnected and gated off through item acquisition would clash and be awkward, don't worry, because it was.
Yep.
Of course, throughout the various trailers that were released in 2024 and 2025, it wasn't known how progress would work, but when many finally got their hands on the game when it released in December of 2025, a common complaint was that this combination didn't really coalesce. When you got down to brass tacks, the environments you explored and beyond were spread far apart by the large open desert known as Soul Valley, which acted more like a Hyrule field dotted with dungeons at various endpoints.
Yeah, with barely anything going on otherwise.
But unlike Zelda, which usually populates that open field with characters, side quests, treasures, and adventuring,
And even then, it's arguably more sparse than I would prefer, but that's just me being persnickety.
Beyond didn't offer much by comparison, because that's not really what Metroid excels at. Aside from 2 enemy types and a few shrine-like underground chambers that would give you supplemental upgrades, Soul Valley is simply meant to be driven through to get to Volt Forge, Fury Green, or the Flare Pool to complete your ultimate objective. Perhaps realizing this, the infamous green crystals were added to said open world so as to give the player something else to do, but smashing open thousands of crystals isn't exactly engaging or meaningful. In another case of doubling down on a not-so-hot idea, Tanabe, Retro Studios, or some madman high up at Nintendo also thought it wise to lock a particular feature behind one of the 3 amiibo figures that launched with the game, which was...
To be fair, this was more just a bit of extra music in Soul Valley, which, still stupid, but... Well, let me put it this way, that would have just been an optional upgrade that you would get as after completing hard mode or something normally, if this had been any other circumstance, which... Still stupid that you're gaining stuff like this behind it.
Was essentially an intergalactic jukebox. Now, normally this wouldn't be a big deal. Oh, your sweet ride can play some stellar tracks courtesy of musical legends Kenji Yamamoto and Minako Hamano. The problem is that without the amiibo, there was no music at all during the open world driving segments, making them feel even emptier and more tedious to traverse than normal.
Yeah, because you get a bit of ambience, but other than that...
A quick fix would have been for the amiibo to simply unlock additional tracks, so I'm not sure about the thought process here, and like, I get how it's Metroid, and you want it to feel isolated sometimes, but they should have given non-amiibo havers something.
Okay, really? I better pause there. That sounds like it's gonna get me content ID flagged, so let's just slow roll this.
Okay, no, that's too far.
Okay, good one.
Further on in that same Nintendo Dream interview, Tanabe outlined a few other issues that affected development. Originally, a professional writer was hired to pen all of Samus's logbook entries, and the various pieces of lore she would come across. But
wait, hang on. That wasn't... Hang on. Where's the buts? Why are you leading with that?
this apparently didn't work out too well, and the writer's efforts were ultimately not used.
Wait, what? Huh? Why? What?
Tanabe then decided to step in and write them all himself, which obviously would take extra time as they need to be translated, with the producer remarking that he felt very rushed during this process.
Why? What? I can't, but what? Why? Huh. Of all the things that could have stun-locked me, that's what stun-locked me. Just... You get a professional to take a look at it, and then you don't even... I mean, I get the impulse. You want something done right, do it yourself. I operate very similarly, but I'm also just a guy in my home office. You don't have that luxury when you're throwing this much time and money at something. What were those entries like that it was such a problem? How bad was that writing, actually? Why did whatever happened there get rejected, but why did a lot like the characterization linger? I don't get it!
This was picked up by players too, as most of the long entries were criticized to be found rather dry and brief for the most part.
Yep.
On that topic of story, the Galactic Federation, who had been in the Prime series ever since Echoes, is featured throughout, and according to Tanabe, this was done to increase the drama and eventually affect the player emotionally. However, the early previews that were published just before the game's launch in a
were completely accurate.
Great case of backfiring, presented this change in a poor light, as journalists were given the game's opening section to play through, which featured everyone's favorite bumbling engineer.
Why would someone so incompetent be hired? You dropped your weapon at the first sign of danger. How did you ever make it into the military?
Miles McKenzie. It can't be overstated how these previews damaged the early perception of Beyond, which...
And then, to be fair, it damaged it even more because it was accurate.
is a shame, because outside the 15-minute sequence where players had to lead Miles to a safe location, he only then appeared sporadically from then on out.
Perhaps, but then the private was also annoying, but then you'd have him constantly call in and say, hey, you can do this, you know? Hey, there's this thing over here in the giant desert so that you know where all the items are still left. The fact that I had to call you and tell you that is a major freaking problem with the design. This is unearthing feelings I didn't know I still had.
Specifically whenever you gave him a chip in exchange for a new upgrade. Now, while this isn't any one group's fault, as the 4 Federation offers...
Yes, that was annoying. Why are you like this? Maintain some level of decorum, geek out later, keep it more subdued, to where it's not pure cringe.
Were sparsely used except for their introduction and at the very end of the game, and the journalists for their part were simply just reporting on the section of the demo that was presented to them. But the fact remains that these previews got things off on a less than optimal foot. It's just one of those things. Obviously, Beyond still had some great aspects to it, as evidenced by its still mostly positive critical reception. Technically, it stands as one of both the Switch and Switch 2's most outstanding games in terms of technical performance, with the latter sporting a 120 FPS mode, 4K resolution, mouse controls, as well as stunning character models.
Well, to be fair, the mouse controls are a bit hamstrung because it's a Joy-Con you're using for the mouse, but still, they work fairly well outside of that issue.
Models, art, and lighting effects throughout. The soundtrack, as mentioned earlier, is among some of the series' best.
Well, honestly, it's hard for me to be an objective judge on that count because, for me, typically, whenever I save a soundtrack, it's not just what it sounds like, but what I associate with it associated with in my mind, to where stuff from, well, I guess recency bias, you'll see a decent amount. If you look through my collection of soundtracks and you'll see what I save as part of playlists, you'll see recency bias kicking in for Xenoblade and whatnot, but that's also because of association with particular moments just as much as anything else.
And finally,
and with the, well, in the case of Metroid, I do have some association across the board with Primes 1, 2, and 3. Well, 2 less so. But with, well, 3 being my first, and 1 being the one everybody talks about, and one I latched onto a decent amount. But with 4, because of the other problems therein, there is a little bit in which Prime 4 soundtrack shows up, but not to the same degree. Though, to be fair, a lot of Fire Emblem Engage's soundtrack also shows up in playlists I create, but at the same time, that's also because the gameplay component's actually good.
Finally, regardless of whether you were using detached Joy-Cons, handheld mode, or with a Pro Controller, utilizing Samus's abilities or doing donuts in the viola was as smooth as butter. Commercially, it seems to have performed relatively well for a Metroid title, selling over 1 million copies as reported back in February, although that still lags behind the performance of Dread, which has since moved over 3 million.
To be fair, that was also the first full-blown 2D Metroid in a very long time, following up on Samus Returns. So you could credit some of the success that Dread saw to Samus Returns. So I don't know if it's necessarily the correct comparison because Prime 4's follow-up was Federation Force, and the long wait time and the previews, which would definitely temper expectations and temper sales. But either way.
So, while the reaction to all these changes Tanabe instituted were certainly mixed, It turns out he may have known they would be, as he designed the game he specifically envisioned before exiting the video game industry altogether. In
Jeez.
January of this year, he announced his retirement from Nintendo, naming Risa Tabata as his successor, which, regardless of how you feel about his body of work, at least this retirement was well earned, as he had been with Nintendo for over 38 years.
Jeez.
Unfortunately though, for Metroid fans, his list of regrets and what he would change while developing Metroid Prime 4 probably is not what most people expected.
Wait, what?
Saying to Nintendo Dream, I conceived the ending scene of the game first and designed the overall structure around that. To that end, I created the Federation troopers who would fight alongside Samus and planned the gameplay so that, as you progress through the game, the bonds between them and Samus, and therefore you the player, would deepen.
Okay, that on its own isn't a problem. And it would not be the first time that someone has developed a story or an entire game around that kind of premise. In fact, one of the game ideas I have is designed explicitly to force a very particular confrontation to occur in the final act. So that in and of itself is isn't objectionable. So I'd be curious to know what people reacted to specifically, if it was that section or if it's what's coming next.
I actually had even more events planned to deepen those bonds, but due to time constraints, they had to be cut. That is my one true regret.
Okay, now I understand. So the first part of that, still not necessarily an issue. Because while a Metroid fan might not want that much of a story component necessarily, that isn't... What's the right way to put this? So for almost every Metroid Prime game, and seemingly every Metroid game that I personally have played, there is an aspect of it where Samus is exploring the ruins of a lost civilization. In Prime 1, it was the Chozo on Talon 4. For Prime 2, it was the remnants of the Luminoth trying to survive against the Ing. In Prime 3, you'd have cases like the planet of Brio, where you would have various rise and fall of civilization there. Although I don't believe you'd have similar on Elysia or the Pirate Homeworld, but still, you'd have that as a repeated aspect throughout. And since in Prime 3, you had a decent amount of character interaction with the Aurora unit, with the Admiral, with the other bounty hunters, to an extent, it would not necessarily be out of place for there to be more character involvement going forward. While you would still have games like Dread, where you would hone in very specifically on Samus in abandoned place, trying to figure out what's going on and what to do, having a story where you also spend time around others working alongside them would not be out of place. The entire sequence on Norian for Metroid Prime 3 is a good example of that, where Samus is working alongside other people, where everyone has their own focus, but you still have time alone where you are very wholly focused on dealing with the current circumstance right in front of you. That in and of itself is not out of place. That is my one true regret. That is the part that would piss people off. Because, not the open world part. I mean, the most charitable way that I can interpret that is that, hey, I had this idea to try and meld open world with Metroid. It didn't work, so be it. At least I tried. That is the most charitable way I can look at it, but if that were me, it would be hard not to be bitter that, if I were really committed to this idea, if I really believed in it, and to see it fail, and to see it really not work, I'd just be going, oh, that stings. So, it would hard not to look back on that and think, man, what was I thinking? So, if that charitable interpretation is correct, then, in a sense, it's fine, but at face value, I can see why that would piss people off.
Wow, so while they both certainly had different career paths and worked on different series, it seems that Tanabe shared plenty in common with Yoshio Sakamoto when it came to Metroid. They had a specific vision, the game they wanted to make, and they certainly made it, even if the final product wasn't
I wondered if it would be of their end, because I didn't recognize that name.
what a lot of people wanted. Thankfully,
I wonder who's more hated, Miles or Adam? Oh, that would be fascinating. Oh, someone has to go ask the Metroid subreddit or somewhere that Metroid fans congregate. I want to know. That sounds hilarious.
though, the Metroid IP still seems like it's in a good place,
Does it?
with strong rumors that Retro will pick up from where they left off on those remastering duties or moving on to a 5th Prime, or Mercury Steam eventually delivering a Super Metroid remake, which
Didn't they already do that? Didn't Mercury Steam just have layoffs a few months ago? Are we sure about this?
given Nintendo's recent penchant for remakes, might indeed be likely. Whatever it is though, the Metroid fanbase, much like the legendary bounty hunter herself, has proven to be nothing if not resilient. And
I don't know about that. We'll see.
if you out there know of any other stories throughout the wide galaxy you'd like me to cover, shout them out in the comments below or enter the high-tech spaceship that is my social media.
Okay,
See you
well.
next mission, and thanks for watching!
Okay, so... yeah. Okay, this brought out emotions in me I didn't know I still had. Okay. No regrets. No regrets. From me, anyway. Why did I spend $70 on this game? Oh, well, to be fair. Made for a fun video, but either way. Let's go ahead and see if I missed anything in chat. Let's see. Alright, so going back to the Sweatshop Factory thing. So, a China simulator? Oh god. Ugh. Who doesn't love good old-fashioned poor labor laws? Oh boy. I'm gonna get so many people mad at me for that. Alright, I also have an idea for an open world office game with so many microtransactions and DLC before it's even out and super unoptimized. Activision, is that you? Oh yeah, also that annoying voice that tells you what to do every 2 seconds. Why not? It's everyone's favorite, clearly. The regrets are still there. Regrets of what, I wonder? Oh boy. Freaking boy. This is what I get for drinking before I started recording. No matter. So, that was that. Good video at all, as always, Mr. Muscles. We will be on our way. So, $70 is $70? Yep, well, hindsight 2020, right? I'll let other people dive headlong into the fray. I say as my pre-order of Fortune's Weave is ready to go and will be showing up in September, but they got me back in with Foldland, then please don't screw it up. Either way, so, next video. Overwatch. Don't focus on it too much personally anymore, as I don't keep track of Blizzard as a whole all that much anymore. Outside of... Actually, I wonder if they were hit by the recent round of layoffs at Microsoft, or if that affected all their other studios. I remember Blizzard getting hit when the acquisition first occurred as a result of needing to consolidate HR and whatnot. But either way, putting that aside. So, it's not something I keep up with all that much, but it's something that's still worth looking through the window on occasionally, because there can oftentimes be some interesting stuff discussed with respect to their games, game design, character design, all that fun stuff. And the last time we had looked at a video regarding Overwatch, it was with respect to the animations, where you could get a decent amount of personality with respect to the characters, just even from a first-person perspective with how they animate, with how the guns move as they walk and all that fun, and how the guns are designed and how they operate when you use taunts and whatnot, or their voice lines and yada yada yada, so where there can still be plenty of personality even in an FPS for the character that you specifically are playing. So, when this popped up, I figured, okay, another idea in the same vein? Cool. That sounds like a plan to me. Oh yeah, speaking of Xbox, yeah. So Bellular tends to be on the level. So, because I think I remember reading somewhere that Xbox had hoped to have, I think, more than double their current Xbox Game Pass subscriptions in order to make that business model more solvent, or at least more reliable, and did not happen. Did not happen. We'll see if the cuts and the reorganization ends up mattering, although, well, we shall see what happens, I suppose. Although, I think I did see some rumors that they are also still putting in applications for H-1B and offshoring, so we'll see what kind of quality help is obtained from that, but, I mean, if you're going to ditch generational talent in favor of glorified contractors, I mean, good luck. We'll see if that ends up working out for you in the long run. That'll be a self-correcting problem if that ends up bearing out. Either way, so, I think the person who's recommended this had a comment on this. So, TB Skyen makes a lot of intriguing videos. He does a lot of character design and animation analysis. I'll just go ahead and take a look real quick. This video itself is fairly old. Let's see what he's put out lately. Okay, so all sorts of stuff. Aspen Hotel, let's see. Alright, Elden Ring stuff. A lot of Elden Ring, actually. Ooh, this would be... Oh, this would be fascinating. Oh, seeing his opinion... Oh yeah, Arcane Season 2 would be fascinating to hear him talk about. Although, Season 1 is unambiguously good. Season 2, a lot of people have problems with the writing. I'd be curious to see how... Okay, how do you spend an hour and a half on just a 2-minute trailer? What the hell? I thought I was bad when it came to Fire Emblem. Damn. Okay, I have questions. And I'd be very curious to see how much of that is actually accurate. Either way, so... A variety of stuff, though, talking about animation and whatnot, so... Interesting. Either way, characters that matter, that's a broad statement. Either way, let's take a look and see what this one in particular has to say for itself. So, as fair warning, I know basically nothing about this character apart from that they exist. So, and genuinely that's really it. So Moira was introduced after I stopped playing Overwatch regularly and stopped spending time keeping track of Blizzard more generally. So we'll go ahead and take a look and see what this has to say for itself.
Hello, scientists and sociopaths. My name is TB Skyen, and in the video a while ago, I mentioned in passing that one day I might like to do a video about Moira from Overwatch, and ever since then, people have been in the comments of my other videos saying, hey, what about Moira? Weren't you going to talk about Moira? What about Moira from Overwatch? She's interesting, you should talk about Moira, and...
Okay, so you got to have your small introduction for people who regularly watch, so alright, let you have your moment.
I have to be honest, at this point, that's getting to be really frickin' encouraging.
Okay, good turnaround, good turnaround. Good subversion of expectations. We like it when they're done well.
I like to be poked like that. I like to hear that there's an interest in hearing about a particular subject, but even more, I like to hear that there's an interest in hearing about it from me. So, to the people who poked me about doing this video in the comments, thank you very much, and I hope the video I'm about to make lives up to your expectations, because we are about to talk about the resident Naruto-running piss wizard of Overwatch.
Oh, jeez. You know what? I can see it, unfortunately. Oh, did I miss something in chat? Let's see. $70 is $70. How much do you think it should have been worth? Presumably referring to Metroid. I don't know. Is there a dollar amount that I would have been satisfied with Metroid? Huh. I'm gonna have to think about that.
Moira. Now, like most characters in Overwatch, Moira is based on a pretty...
Okay, so I'm gonna be that guy. You can hide your mouse cursor in OBS recordings. You should probably do that.
Clearly recognizable archetype, specifically the archetype of the detached scientist. She's someone who's primarily interested in scientific progress, doing her scientific work, and everything to her is otherwise secondary. That's an archetype that can be played in a lot of ways. For instance, on The Big Bang Theory, Sheldon Cooper is a pretty clear example of this archetype, albeit an extremely annoying one. Moira, however, is not played for comedy. She's played entirely seriously, and she is, for that reason, just a little bit terrifying.
Hang on, is that Nami's theme that's playing in the background? Hold on. Hang on. let's see. Hang on, I think I saw a comment real quick that might tie into that. He's big into Elden Ring and the other games made by the same studio. He also does a lot of video on League of Legends, though he no longer plays the game. Yeah, because that sounds like Tidecaller in the background, which is a theme from League of Legends. So hang on, I want to listen back real quick.
Archetype, specifically the archetype of the detached scientist. She's someone who's primarily interested in scientific progress, doing her scientific work, and everything to her is otherwise secondary. That's an archetype that can be...
Yep, that's a League of Legends to the soundtrack. Here, actually, I can pull up the exact one. Hang on. I'm gonna zero out my screen in case something comes up it shouldn't. Let's see. Hang on, I'm gonna find it. I am going to find it. I have this somewhere. League of Legends. Here we are. Yes, it's this one. This is what's playing in the background. Here. It pulled DLC up so I can show it. I don't know if they ever made a volume 2 of these, but I think they did something similar with, I can't remember. It was some sort of skin. I think it was a skin for Echo that was all techno and whatnot. I think it was Echo. Either way. Yes, that's what's playing in the background. Alright, sorry. I got us on a tangent. Let's go back.
Played in a lot of ways. For instance, on The Big Bang Theory, Sheldon Cooper is a pretty clear example of this archetype, albeit an extremely annoying one. Moira, however, is not played for comedy. She's played entirely seriously, and she is, for that reason, just a little bit terrifying. Originally, she was an ordinary scientist working within the bounds of science as, a mainstream discipline, but eventually her unethical methods and the difficulty of reproducing all of her results in a laboratory condition got her ousted from polite scientific communities, and she lost access to her funding. Blackwatch, the Black Ops organization within Overwatch, then steps in and offers her an opportunity to continue her work, which she jumps at. But even while she's working for Blackwatch, the lore implies, to the point of almost confirming, that she is already working for the terrorist organization Talon, feeding them information and secrets in return for more funding and more opportunities to continue her work. And
okay, so the dedicated to the research above all else, so relatively straightforward archetypes. So do they do something well, I'd be curious to see what that results in then. Let's hear more.
When Blackwatch eventually collapses under the weight of several disasters, she jumps ship to Talon immediately, not because she cares about Overwatch, or Blackwatch, or Talon, or their conflicts, or their motivations, or the things that these organizations want, but because they offer her opportunities to continue her scientific work.
Let's see, all I'm saying is give me a studio and $1 billion and I'm saving gaming. Oh, you want 5 times the production budget of, what was that game that got shut down within a few days? Crap, what was it? It was one of the ones that Sony published, live service. How am I forgetting the name of that thing? It'll come back to me, watch.
So Moira is in that sense rather unique within Overwatch in that...
Shut it, brother, I'm too busy.
She's a character who has really no moral horse in the...
No. Brother's talking to me. Concord, yes, thank you, chat. Yes. You'll make Concord 2.5. I mean, with that budget, you could make two... Actually, wait. Yeah, wait, it was 400 million because it got completely bloated, didn't it? Yes, it was Concord. How did I forget that name?
The race of...
Actually, I feel like that should be more insulting to it. This is what I get for drinking before starting this.
Unique within Overwatch in that she's a character who has really no moral horse in the race of any of the central moral conflicts of the story.
Wouldn't that somewhat apply to Sombra?
She doesn't care about Overwatch, Talon, Blackwatch. She doesn't even really care that much about the human-Omnic conflict, except she likes Omnics as expressions of human scientific progress and brilliance that she wants to dissect and understand, but things about Omnic rights or the war crimes committed by the AI, those things aren't really that interesting to her. She cares about her work first and foremost. So she's a duplicitous character. She's someone who keeps her cards close to her chest, who lies, who steals, who cheats, all as a means to an end that she feels justifies all of it. This comes across in her character design with a lot of ambiguity. Now, ambiguity is interesting in character design, and I mean that in the literal sense. Having
well, what do you mean by ambiguity, then?
Ambiguity between who a character says they
TV Skyen also made a video on Concord where he ripped apart the designs. Oh, that would be fun.
Say they are, and the character that they actually are, and the character that they look like, that creates interest. Think about a villain like Hans from Frozen, who comes across at first as the stereotypical, kind-hearted Disney prince, but who's eventually revealed to be the villain of the whole thing. That kind of thing is accomplished by having ambiguity between a character's design and their actual actions and motivations. But there's also a lot of danger to it, because at worst, ambiguity can create a character design that is kind of confused and unfocused, and maybe seems like the people who made it don't really know what they're doing. To give you an example, when you see Reinhardt lumbering at you across the battlefield, you have a few reasonable expectations of what that character is capable of.
Yeah, he got big hammer, he got big armor, he take lots of hits, he smack you hard.
He has a big-ass hammer and no other obvious weapons, so he's probably melee. And he's wearing a big-ass suit of power armor, so he's probably pretty tanky and difficult to take down. Now imagine that he kills you from halfway across the map with a sniper shot to the head, somehow with his frickin' hammer, and you're gonna go, what the fuck is up with that character design? He doesn't look like he should be capable of doing that at all.
Average day in an anime. What's your point? Okay, I'm just being cheeky. Carry on.
And yet he was. That's bad character design. Now that's an extreme example, but it's part of the reason why ambiguity is a dangerous game to play, because at worst, you can...
Well, I wouldn't necessarily even call that example ambiguous. I would call that inconsistent. Because with Reinhardt's design as it is right now, you have a clear understanding from a visual component what he is. And so if, from a gameplay standpoint, that didn't comport, that wouldn't be necessarily ambiguity, that would be a disconnect. So I don't know if that's necessarily the best example, but still.
End up communicating.
That might just be semantics on my part, though. We'll carry on.
Factually incorrect information to your players about the capabilities of the characters within the game. Moira, fortunately, doesn't have that problem. No, what's up?
I've always wanted to make the hugest, most meanest character I could and make it a healer. Actually, there's one time where I was writing something that takes place after a D&D campaign my friends and I wrapped up a few years ago, and I got to do something with a character there that I didn't get to do during the game, where one character had been granted what they called an Amulet of Undying, which let me say, oh, this character's about to be dropped to 0. Nope, they're at 1 HP. So they're still alive, but they're still hurt, and will be hurting, but they are alive, and they can still move. They're not rolling death saves. And so I ended up thinking, I've never used that on an enemy to keep them alive, to interrogate them or anything, or to effectively use it as a means to just bring them literally to the brink of death. I wonder if I can create a circumstance that would do that, and I'm honestly kind of surprised that some nonsense like that hasn't been pulled in an actual D&D campaign now since I did that. I should honestly be scared for especially for where the characters in the current campaign are going, but that's beside the point. So you can do all sorts of mean stuff even with a healer.
But with Moira,
even when they are morally upstanding, quote unquote.
Rather, is that she represents a curious ambiguity of genre. In fact, Moira is one of my strongest arguments when I say that Overwatch is far more a fantasy video game than it is a sci-fi video game, because Moira is a...
Oh, hang on. Be right back, boys. I'm needed for something. sorry about that, boys. I had left something out that I needed to see to. So, let's see. Let me go ahead and see the chat since I had run off. Let's see. The most brittle character you can imagine and make him a tank. Well, depends on... Well, to be fair, you throw magic into play, have them be a mage tank for lack of a better term. I could see that working. Either way. Sorry about the pause. Let's get back to it.
A witch. She's a witch, like she's a sorceress. She's some kind of wizard.
So, calling it more fantasy than sci-fi. So I guess to more detail that, I'd be curious to know what the basis for that is, because you could argue that to an extent, because I believe they keep it fairly ambiguous as to how Reaper was brought back, for lack of a better term, if I'm remembering my lore correctly. So I could sort of see it depending on how much detail they go into, but I'd be curious to hear how else that's substantiated.
That's literally what she are. She throws energy beams around and magic balls that fly around and shoot beams of light at the enemy, and more than anything, her power set resembles that of a Dungeons & Dragons cleric, with beams of negative energy to hurt the enemy and positive energy to heal her allies. In that sense, despite being a character who is more than anything else a scientist, in-game she behaves like a wizard. But it goes even further than that, in fact. Moira's ambiguity extends down to her gender. Now, I know just by saying the word gender that 500 angry fedoras have been summoned to my comment section, which...
Well, what do you mean by ambiguous with respect to that? So, be very careful what you... Well, I mean, you clearly know that you need to be mindful of what you say, but, please don't bring the culture war to my doorstep.
I have to admit I brought that on myself, but
Yes, you did!
nonetheless, this is an important part of discussing her character design.
If you know that this is important to discuss, don't give the justification. Just own it and work with it. Talk through it. Let the dumb people be dumb and angry. It's fine. Explain thyself and let the normal people understand. It's fine.
Because Moira's gender is, at a glance, ambiguous.
Is it?
She is very, very androgynous. There's really not a lot of markers about her that traditionally suggest femininity. She doesn't...
Need I say more?
have long hair. She doesn't have...
So?
Even the very heavy, typical Overwatch feminine makeup. She does have some...
So?
Eyeshadow and a bit of mascara because they...
And you see that on men how often exactly?
They just cannot help themselves. But otherwise, her features are very sharp, they're very angular, and in that sense, they're kind of...
Never mind any noise you may be hearing in the background.
ambiguously manly.
Are they? I mean... You see those kind of long nails on a man. Are you sure about this? I'm not sure I follow.
And this is contrasted even more against the other women of Overwatch.
Okay, I will grant you that compared to the other female characters, that as a point of comparison, yes, she is less, I guess, feminine in that sense. By comparison, I will grant you that.
Who, all of them pretty much, are defined by the hourglass shape and the S-curve.
I don't know if May necessarily... I don't know if that necessarily applies to May or Zarya, but I'll grant that for the others.
Now, the S-curve is very prominently on display with Widowmaker up here. As you can see, you have this winding curve that forms down her spine, across her buttocks, into her...
And to be fair, actually, that might be a more important thing to mention, where, yes, she is definitely Moira is definitely female, but she doesn't have... Well, it's the distinction on pose. I think I remember seeing someone who is cosplaying notice that, hey, the pose is everything, where here's me just standing normally, just looking at you straight on, here's me doing a pose, look at how much of a difference it makes because it accentuates the particular features. So, and allows you to get a better angle, and it just looks more dynamic and yada yada yada. So, in that sense, I think you have an argument that it is very much, well, very straight-laced with respect to the pose. Okay, that is another good argument.
Her thighs, and this is present in characters like Symmetra, Mercy, Diva, even the armors of characters like Farah and indeed Brigitte have that characteristic hourglass shape. And this is a tool in character design, by the way, to express femininity, because that hourglass shape, that S-curve, is extremely heavily associated with presentations of femininity. So
Fair enough.
this is missing with Moira, in the sense
Yeah, in the sense that you don't see her doing that kind of pose, presumably, so that's fair.
that every other female character in Overwatch pretty much has it. She seems to be missing it. I found this...
Well, you have this as an example of what the model looks like, because, it's not as pronounced, but it's still there to an extent. Although, I'd be curious to see what her default pose looks like.
wonderful render of her character model without color that offers us a much better view of her. Now, the hourglass shape is still sort of implied. She still has a very wide top across a narrow middle that then flares out into these armored skirts.
Yeah.
Suggesting a bit of an hourglass shape, but it is much less expressed. It is much more subtle. You
I'd argue that May's subtler than that, but never mind me.
have to look for it a lot harder. And this is exacerbated further by the weird faceplate that she's got on and those weird
I mean, this pose where you don't only see the upper half of the torso and her face, I mean, yeah, I wouldn't associate, well, I wouldn't consider that traditionally feminine, so that's fair, but I feel like you're overselling this a little bit.
techno eyebrows that she's got attached atop of her normal eyebrows, and everything about her is just a little bit ambiguous. There's a little bit of ambiguity to everything about her, and this extends even to her skins, where she has a skin based on David Bowie, possibly the most androgynous man in all of human history.
I don't know too much about David Bowie, so I will not be one to comment on that.
The only other character among the women of Overwatch who is as, subtle about their gender presentation is Ana.
And that would also make sense because of the age, and so you would expect something more elderly rather than, for lack of a better word, the youthful aspects of the other characters. So, although I don't know if that's necessarily the best way to pronounce it, but given Anna's age, so taking the stance of, hey, I'm the stern elder figure, I think that lines up better, especially given that there isn't much that you could necessarily show over the long cloak.
Who wears this big-ass, bulky sniper's outfit, which is one of the designs in Overwatch, by the way, I really like.
Oh yeah,
which
it's a
I
nice
might
design.
take another look at someday if you all poke me in the comments about it long enough.
Okay, so I'll look into videos since this was 8 years ago and find something, huh?
The ambiguity goes perhaps even a little bit further, because it extends even into her color expression. She uses two main colors, yellow, which is the color of healing in Overwatch, and purple, which is generically a color that tends to be associated with darkness, with evil, with dark deeds. And she
Well, depending on where you're looking, it's also seen as a color of royalty because, well, dating back to ancient times, but I suppose that isn't necessarily something that always holds true today, so never mind me.
combines them
I guess a better way to associate it would be something like poison, perhaps.
in her ultimate into a unified beam of energy, so that constant interplay between two opposites is at work in every part of her design, almost always.
Okay.
She also has heterochromia in her eyes, by the way, which is the world's least subtle way to suggest that a character might be two-faced, that she has one eye in one color and the other eye in another color. She also, that faceplate on her face, what it reminds me of most of all is Phantom of the Opera, that, iconic
Really?
half mask that he tends to wear in stage productions of that particular show.
Aren't both eyes covered in that? But that's just me nitpicking. Yeah, that's just me nitpicking.
But it also offers the sense that some part of her is hidden. Like, that most of her face is visible, but some of it is just kind of hidden away. Some of who she is hidden away. And as a visual metaphor, I find that quite interesting. She's also someone who's not approachable. She's someone who's not dependable and not trustworthy, and that too is expressed in her character design through, again, the rather unsubtle presence of dozens and dozens of completely bizarre needles. Now, one of my pet peeves about armor
where you were
design
going
is
with
when fantasy designers will add various spikes to armor in odd places, just mostly as a way to make the character seem more menacing, but where you realize that, oh, if this character raised their arm really quick, they would literally just drive a spike through their own neck, so that...
Yeah, and that is an issue that you run into nowadays, especially where there's only so many ways that you can redesign armor before you start retreading old ground or or risk just grossly over designing it. So you tragically see that a lot in a lot of places. So yeah, fair enough to respond to that negatively.
That's a terrible idea. Moira doesn't suffer quite so badly from this, but I do still maintain that if she raises her arm too suddenly, she's in serious danger of rupturing one of those pipes that she's got running around her neck. But of course, that's not really the point of the spikes. They don't really have to have a practical application. What they're telling us is...
Well, this also isn't explicitly armor, so you can argue in this case, even if it were a complete fashion statement, for lack of a better phrase, then that's still technically acceptable.
that this character is prickly, that she's spiky, that she's dangerous to the touch. And this is emphasized further in the long, sharp fingernails and the weird, crooked hands that she's got running around. These
Yeah, it looks like Saruman using the Palantir.
hands, by the way, are so prominent that you can even really...
Actually, here, brother, since you're reacting to this, tell me that doesn't look like Saruman's hand over the Palantir.
Well, probably a modernized Sauron's hand.
Saruman, but yes.
I mean, Sauron. Yeah.
Either way, but that's getting off topic.
I actually know
fingernails and the...
a little bit about Moira. At least I think that's Moira.
Yeah, they've gone through the background, so they was just talking about the character design and all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
Mostly the outfit.
Yeah, basically one of the offensive support characters that can...
Yeah, that can do both.
Yeah.
Either way, as you were.
The
Yeah, she
weird,
was
crooked...
actually part of the team that was behind
As they discussed.
this rise in power.
Well, they didn't go into that detail on that one, but
Yeah,
they did say
there was
she was
actually
involved.
The event that went on for a while. That
I need to get back to the video.
Through it.
You want to talk Overwatch, he'll talk plenty. He's in the Discord server if you want to talk with him. Either way.
hands that she's got running around. These hands, by the way, are so prominent that you can even really tell that they're there in her character design in-game. If you take a look at her, and this is partly because her hands are the dangerous part of her, like that's where she fires her energy beams and her healing beams from, so they have to be kind of emphasized, but it's also part of all of this work that the game is doing to tell you that this character is sharp, she's dangerous, she is perhaps even duplicitous. And that's really the core of everything I could think about to talk about with Moira. She's someone who's constantly ambiguous, constantly not quite telling you the whole of the truth. Someone who's working two sides of everything always. Science on one hand, magic essentially on the other. Healing and damage. Loyalty and complete disloyalty. Dedication to an ideal, but only her own ideals. That is essentially what Moira is, and that is why, and I'm sorry to bring this up, like I have no ill will towards the person who did this, but nonetheless I have to bring up this. This is a fan redesign of Moira that was posted to, I think, the Overwatch subreddit at some point. I've kept it around because I wanted to talk about it someday, but...
Yeah. Was this because it was just unusual to have a female character without long hair? Or I wonder what the motivation for this was.
In the context of this video, I want to talk about it as an expression of how this misses the point of Moira's design, because everything that this fan redesign does, it's not that it's ugly. There's absolutely nothing ugly about it. It's not badly made, but it misses the point of Moira as a character by removing her ambiguity. The gender presentation becomes much clearer. She has much softer features that are more befitting of her femininity. Even the heterochromia of her eyes is reduced, and the, metal faceplate that makes her so bizarre and kind of off-putting, which is kind of important to her character, is also removed in favor of making her more, well, essentially more attractive and beautiful. The problem with this fan redesign isn't just that it turns her into another pretty Overwatch lady, it's also that it infringes on that prickly, off-putting ambiguity that is at the core of Moira's character concept.
Arguably, you would want Moira to be, for lack of a better word, for lack of a better phrase, not traditionally attractive, because, I mean, if she is supposed to be that prickly character, which I'll take you at your word that is the intention there, and given the background I can believe it, you don't necessarily want her to be conventionally attractive unless she's going to be a snake in the grass, which, if it's going to be that blatant that then she's not the snake in the grass. She's just the snake right in front of you.
So, that's about all I could really think of to say about Moira. She's someone I could probably talk at length about how her character design is different from the designs of women in general in Overwatch, and indeed the character designs of women in Overwatch are an interesting topic, especially with the introductions of characters like Orisa, where you can talk all kinds of stuff about coding and how femininity is presented in a robot, but that is all for another video. My name has been TBSkyne. If you have enjoyed this, there's a like button down below which is just thirsty for your touch. It wants you to press it so hard. There's a dislike button as well, but it's not as much of a masochist, so you shouldn't really click on it. It doesn't really do anything. It's there. You can use it.
Well, there are the restore YouTube dislikes by technicality, although they ended up burying the dislikes further into the YouTube analytics page, which kind of annoying to try and get your finger on the pulse of how it's been received. I don't think I can even get an explicit number of how many dislikes I have now, just the percentage, which annoying. It's okay to tell me. I'm not that sensitive. Tell me if I screwed up.
I mean, if you want to. Otherwise, subscribe if you want more weird-ass rambly videos like this, and if you have any comments, anything you want to poke me about, you should feel free to leave them down below. I try to read all of my comments, even if I can't respond to most of them, because there are, frankly, too many of them these days. Thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you in the next video.
Alright, so fascinating stuff. I had a couple issues with the arguments at hand, but still, given the fact that... Oh, nope.
How?
We do not... Well, I'm sure there is plenty that can be talked about, but we can save that for another day. So, given especially the fact that this seemed to be an off-the-cuff recording, I'm assuming that he most likely had an outline or had been mulling over this for a while, but given that this is off-the-cuff, well played. Apart from a couple minor quibbles here, such as, hey, mind your mouse cursor in OBS recordings, although I suppose you may want it at some in some instances, given the circumstances, but still. Did a good job given that this was off the cuff, relatively speaking, so I'll go ahead and leave it there. So, next and final, actually let me check through chat real quick, make sure that everything should be fine. Okay, looks like we've got Lou who's just going on more tangents about how we can make the worst game ever, as per always. Okay, not as per always, but still. Let's see. Glad you overall liked it. I'll be sure to share more of his content. Alrighty. Actually, was that a Discord ping on to that effect? Or nope, that was something unrelated. What was that? Ah, okay, cool. Sorry about that. Okay, sorry. I should really stop setting my phone down on my microphone stand. Apologies, boys. So, glad you overall liked it. I'll be sure to share more of his content. Yeah, feel free to. And now chat's giving me lip. Yes, worst. I'm talking about you, Lou. Chill. Don't pretend like that isn't what you're doing. I'm slow, but I'm not stupid. Although at one point in time, those were basically the same thing, but never mind. Am I going to dignify what he just posted in response? Okay, so, final video for tonight. How one man's ego destroyed Telltale Games. This is very much something where I saw the title and thought, oh, this should be interesting. I have no idea how good this video is going to be, but with the pseudo-resurgence of the Telltale formula with Dispatch coming out a while ago, I thought it would be interesting to go digging back into what exactly it was about. So for those of you who don't know or don't recall, Telltale Games at one point were the masters of effectively the episodic adventure game, where you'd have a chapter 1 that would come out and would be what's sold initially, and then you'd have multiple chapters introduced over the course of a few months to occasionally a couple of years, depending on the exact time frame, where you would have a little bit a degree to which your choices in the moment would influence the outcome, which varied a decent amount depending on the game and the circumstances, although less so in later years. But at some point it reached, well, but from an outsider's perspective, what I recall is that it eventually reached a critical mass where they were trying to do too much at once and ended up in a point where they would have to take on new projects in order to get the new investment for the 20 to 25 that you'd have to spend for a new project, in order to then continue funding and making sure that everything got done. So that I think they got into a debt loop. So where they would have, I think, multiple things going at once. You'd have Tales of the Borderlands. I think they were involved in Minecraft Story Mode. A Batman spin-off, The Walking Dead spin-off, The Wolf Among Us. And you'd have multiple among these running concurrently to where it just became too much for them to manage at once. And that was the impression I had, where it just became too much at once and just collapsed under its own weight. That was the perception, and that's my memory of it, but I don't remember too much more than that. So I'd be curious to see what kind of information could be coming out after, because I don't know too much about the internals with respect to the developers. So that's the part that I'm curious about. So let's go ahead and jump into this.
In 2012, Telltale Games was on top of the world. The Walking Dead was a cultural phenomenon, revitalizing the adventure game genre and winning more than 80 Game of the Year awards.
Well, to be fair, adventure game, broad terminology, but short version, not point and clicks, but more so heavily story driven, where you have a limited control over the outcome, not as much, so tending to be a bit lighter on the gameplay side.
They were receiving offers from some of the biggest IPs in the world, begging Telltale to make a game for them. But just 6 years later, they were bankrupt.
Oh yeah, hang on a minute. Did they also get a Game of Thrones one? I vaguely recall that.
Behind the scenes was one of the most grueling crunches in gaming history, and all of the issues pointing to one man and his insatiable ego.
Okay, so so it looks like my recollection of things is somewhat accurate, where they just tried to take on too much at once, so let's see how that bore out.
In 2011, Telltale Games was still a small indie studio. They were founded in 2004 after Troy Molander, Dan Connors, and Kevin Bruner left LucasArts to pursue their own projects.
Okay, that's where I thought they were an offshoot of that if they're doing adventure games, because it used to be, if you were looking for point and clicks, you'd go for stuff like Monkey Island or Grim Fandango, which was old school LucasArts.
Known for point-and-click adventure games like
speaking of which,
Tales from Monkey Island and Sam & Max, the team at Telltale earned a reputation when they started turning existing IPs into games. Wallace & Gromit, Jurassic Park, Back to the Future, and Law & Order. Yeah, a Law & Order video game exists. It was through these film and TV adaptations that Telltale received the opportunity of a lifetime.
I wonder how a small studio... Actually, no, if you had LucasArts credibility, that would help you to get connections, so never mind my comment. I have Minecraft Story Mode for the Wii U next to me? Oh, jeez.
A chance to work on a game based on The Walking Dead. At the time, The Walking Dead was one of the biggest shows on television. Part drama, part survival horror, it had all the elements needed to make a solid adventure game. But Telltale didn't want to just emulate what they'd done with previous titles, they wanted to do something special. When development started in 2011, a big trend in AAA games was consequential decision making, putting players in a position where the choices they make would have serious consequences down the road. Games like Mass Effect and Heavy Rain really let players shape the narrative.
Well, stuff like that has been around for a while, although I don't know how... Well, actually, how much did Heavy Rain allow? Because wasn't that Quantic Dream, i.e. David Cage stuff? I think that sounds correct to me, but I'd be curious. I'll have to go digging into that later.
Choosing this option would lead to this person not trusting you. Saving one person would lead another to dying. Stuff like that. Telltale decided to go full bore into this kind of storytelling, and boy, did it work. As a game, The Walking Dead Season 1 was incredibly simple, essentially a graphic novel with QuickTime elements, but the storytelling was gripping. The choices felt real, and overnight, the game took the world by storm. The first season released episodically, keeping the hype going for months, as people followed Lee and Clementine until the conclusion of Season 1 in November 2012. The game was easy enough to pick up that non-gamers could play it, and the consequential decision-making made each playthrough feel unique. With everything going for it, The Walking Dead Season 1 was not only one of the best-selling games of the year, it also won more than 80 Game of the Year awards.
Wait, one of the best-selling games that year? Jeez. That would have been Oh, geez, seeing Jimquisition up there? Oh, that's funny. How far you have fallen.
In 2012, the idea that a point-and-click adventure game could win Game of the Year was kind of shocking, but to its credit, the game was really, really good. But while everyone and their grandma was singing the game's praises, there was one person who wasn't exactly satisfied with its success. Telltale CEO, Kevin Bruner. Bruner was the one who designed the Telltale tool, the game engine used to make all of Telltale's games. While The Walking Dead was receiving awards left, right, and center, Bruner wasn't getting nearly as much credit for his work behind the scenes as he thought he deserved. Instead, it was the writers and directors, Sean Vanneman and Jake Rodkin in particular, who...
Okay, so those would be the more glamorous jobs, for lack of a better term, because, and to be fair, not necessarily without reason, because for something that's story-driven, and even for stuff where the story is even just half and half with gameplay, if the story isn't there, if the writing isn't there, then it all falls apart. And we've seen multiple examples where that ended up backfiring. And you see it with modern Hollywood too, where the visuals may be good, the characters may be compelling, but then you look at how it's written and you look and see, oh wait, we got this person fresh from college who doesn't have much writing experience, thrust him into an environment that's foreign and very difficult to work under and told them, hey, write all this, and then ended up skimping on that part, and then it led to everything falling apart. So, and being incoherent. So, oops. So, it's not without reason that that would get so much attention over the more technical aspects, because the technical aspect is the part that we would, well, that's a crowd like us, honestly, would get autistically obsessed over. But at the same time, given that for the mainstream doesn't necessarily care how the sausage is made, they care whether the sausage is good, it's understandable, although I can understand it stinging as well.
Who were getting the spotlight. This irked Bruner, who felt that his contribution was just as important as theirs, and he took things kind of personally.
Do we have... well, that is a strong claim to make. Do you have evidence for that?
Moving forward, Bruner more or less forbade creative leads from talking to the press about Telltale Games.
Wait, what? Hang on. Please tell me you have a citation for this. This sounds insane.
Bruner wanted to be the only one.
Is this... hang on. Let's see if I can find... hang on, I'm gonna go see if I can find this. So this is The Verge. Okay, is this actually about Telltale? Nope, this is actually about Telltale. Okay. No, I don't want to subscribe. Okay, I'm gonna see if I can jerry-rig this on my side. Hang on. Did it work? It doesn't look it. Not really. Okay, so wasn't able to get the full article, unfortunately. Actually, did it get thrown into an archives site? It did. Okay. Yeah, I got snapshotted a bunch. Okay, let's see if I can pull up a snapshot that won't just bar me with a paywall. Forbidden. Oof. Try this one. Okay, cool. Alright, so this is a snapshot closer toward its original publish. So, let's go ahead and take a look at the citation. In 2012, on a alright, so let's get through the... actually, yeah, we'll read the whole thing. We'll give them their full credit. So, in 2012, on a light-drenched stage amid screams and cheers, Star Trek actress Zoe Saldana announced Spike Video Game Awards Game of the Year, The Walking Dead. The win was a huge coup for its relatively small developer, Telltale Games. Its emotional storytelling-focused games take on the popular zombie franchise, beat out hugely popular games like Dishonored and Mass Effect 3 that required hundreds of developers and cost tens of millions of dollars to make. Alright, so solid start. Introducing the concept. The Telltale Games team, including co-founders Kevin Bruner and Dan Connors, and The Walking Dead creator Robert Kirkman made their way on stage to accept the award. Kirkman accepted the large black statue from Zaldana with both hands and handed it off to Connors and Bruner. Bruner in turn gestured to two others on stage, Sean Vanneman and Jake Rodkin, the project lead and co-creators of the game, thanking them for creating the game's heroes. Neither of them was named on stage for their work in creating the studio's biggest creative success. Shortly before, two women in sparkly outfits ushered everyone off stage, Vanneman abruptly pulled the statue from Bruner's hand in a moment that appeared unplanned and said, "We work with the most talented people on the planet." At the time, Telltale was a studio of under 100 people, small by mainstream standards where headcounts can range from hundreds to thousands, and to my knowledge that still holds true. And in an industry where storytelling often takes a backseat to fun gameplay, well, I guess back in 2012 that bore out, although you see a variety of stuff nowadays. The win established Telltale as a successful developer that valued storytelling and character development above all else. Over the next several months, awards for The Walking Dead continued to pile up, a pivotal and defining moment for a studio that had been in a challenging financial situation just a year before. The company began hiring at a breakneck speed, tripling its headcount over just a geez. Okay, I'm already seeing the problems here. What? Tripling? Okay, I understand wanting to scale up, but damn! Soon it would capture the attention of some of Hollywood's most well-loved franchise, delivering spin-off games like Batman, Game of Thrones, and Guardians of the Galaxy that focused on narrative and emotional investment instead of action or bombastic set pieces, although I believe in the case of Batman there were still some of that, but still. But the studio's meteoric rise would not last. In November 2017, the company announced that it was laying off 90 developers, roughly a quarter of its staff. For some at Telltale, the news was a shock. Wait, really? For others, the inevitable outcome of what sources familiar with the company describe as years of a culture that promoted constant overwork. Okay, so sources within the companies, so rumors then, take it with a grain of salt. Toxic management and creative stagnation. The Verge spoke to more than a dozen current and former developers at Telltale for this story, many of whom requested anonymity for fear of retribution from current and prospective employers. Okay, so take it with a grain of salt. Although some of the problems were specific to Telltale and its management, many of the developers' troubles were emblematic of the unsustainable and erratic development practices that plague the video game industry at large. Okay, and we mentioned that a little bit when we started looking over this, where, hey, you took on too much at once, and it buried you, so that inevitably hit Telltale when they tried to go big as well. So, let's see. I think we've seen enough as far as, well, let's see. But there's not necessarily a direct citation of what specifically he claimed. But I guess we'll go ahead and let him give the citation if it exists. So let's see what it's got.
Allowed to take interviews, be on panels at conventions, and have...
Okay, cool. This looks like it has... Okay, so... tightening grip. Okay, so actually, let's go search for that. Whoops. Alrighty. Multiple sources say this... Say the same of the studio's most troubling dynamics originated from one person, co-founder Kevin Bruner. Bruner worked primarily as a programmer prior to Telltale, including during his stint at LucasArts. But he wore many hats during his time at Telltale. First as the company's CTO and later as director and CEO. According to numerous current and former employees, Bruner's behavior became significantly more abrasive and inflexible after the success of The Walking Dead. Thanks to his background in programming, he had been a strong force in creating game development tools for Telltale. Okay, so this looks like it's going to be the primary source for the video we're watching, so we'll see how he presents it. As the studio's popularity exploded, some employees felt he wanted to step into the role of a design auteur, which sources say made him resistant to give the spotlight to other employees of the company. That's when things got really bad, says a former employee. I think a lot of the insecurity came from The Walking Dead. the game's success had significantly raised the profiles of Rodkin and Vanneman and earned them widespread praise. Quote, "I think that really irked Bruner a lot," says the source. "He felt that he deserved that. It was his project, or it was his company. He should have gotten all that love." Okay, so that's where it's coming. So this looks like it's the primary source for the video we're watching, so we'll see how that bears out.
Have quotes featured in magazines. He wanted to be seen as the creative force, and he was also afraid that if people like Vanneman and Rodkin got too much of the spotlight, they'd leave the company and start projects of their own.
I'd be curious to know what motivated that sense. Is that because that's what he felt he did when they splintered off and formed Telltale?
Led to a very tense environment at Telltale, with many describing Bruner as the Eye of Sauron, watching their every move. These internal issues were exacerbated when Bruner made the decision to rapidly expand production in 2013. At the time, Telltale was just finishing up their next game, The Wolf Among Us, and were trying to figure out what to make next. With the success of The Walking Dead, Telltale had the capital and the reputation to license some of the biggest IPs in Hollywood: Batman, Guardians of the Galaxy, Game of Thrones. Over the course of a few short years, the studio exploded to over 300 employees, and Telltale signed on to create several different games for licensed IPs, promising to do for them what Telltale already did for The Walking Dead.
Okay, so again, repeating stuff that we saw in that Verge article. So, did he link the Verge article? He did not. Well, either way, you saw me go searching for it. Given that I was able to find it by going and hunting down the title, that should be sufficient.
On paper, the increase in manpower meant Telltale should have been able to put out games faster and more efficiently.
Well, the problem is that when you introduce more staff, that also means you have a little bit of overhead. And regardless of whether you're talking about staff at a company or multi-threaded processing in a computer, the overhead is going to impact your performance overall. So that is something that you have to be mindful of. And given that, let's see. Well, I suppose it depends on what they're working on. Because if each team was effectively siloed and you had different writers and animators working on a particular piece where they were only focused in on making sure that this particular bit was in good shape, that theoretically would be fine. And then that might actually be a good thing in the long run. And I've thought about this with respect to pipe dreams of if I could get a game studio off the ground of, you'd have the problem of the one indie game that if you end up not having money coming in from the one bad indie game, you could end up being in trouble if you fly solo, even if you're under a publisher model. So what if instead you had just, say you have 100 employees, what if each of them is working on a game in teams from 5 to 20, to where you can stagger releases, target different genres, to where even if one's not doing well, another will be fine. But even then, there would still be some overhead that you'd have to worry about. So I'd be curious to... I wonder how viable that would be in practice, because we've seen instances where you can have a small team at Tango Gameworks go off to the side and create Hi-Fi Rush and have a grand old time, but that still get canned by Microsoft because Microsoft, but still. I wonder how viable that would be. And I wonder if that is really what happened to Telltale, although if there is this Eye of Sauron just standing over everything, stymieing progress, then you could have the best developers in the world, and if they don't feel as if they can actually make what they're supposed to, why would they stick around?
But in practice, hiring 200 new employees meant the office quickly turned into a faceless mass of cubicles and middle management.
Yep, there's the overhead I was thinking about. Because if you are going to scale up like that, it should be one team at a time, where, okay, we've got the current team that we have, let's fragment it a little bit to where we have a couple teams and then fill in some extra gaps to where you slowly build things up. Slowly ensure that you integrate everybody so that everybody still knows as many people as possible, even if you won't know everyone.
Whereas the team that made The Walking Dead and The Wolf Among Us were a tight-knit crew who had been working together for a long time, their releases from 2014 onward were made by a larger, younger, and less experienced group. The size of the studio got too large too fast. To make matters worse, Bruner started to become increasingly overbearing and inflexible. micromanaging every part of the development process and wanting everything to be tailored to his own personal taste.
Wonder how he set up the environments for the room. Useful. Unique way of presenting it too. I like that.
For the creatives at the company, this was exceedingly difficult because they'd have some amazing idea that they wanted to share or some new way of telling a story, and they'd almost always get shot down by Brunner. It must have been a nightmare working for this guy, having the Grinch as your boss. Thankfully, this Christmas season...
Okay. Is this... Yep, that's an ad. What is that? Raid Shadow Legends? Yeah, it looks like it. Yep, that looks like Raid Shadow Legends. We're just gonna move on.
To say enough was enough. Sean Vanneman, Jake Rodkin, and The Wolf Among Us writer Adam Hines felt that Brunner was stifling their creativity. In 2013, Vanneman and Rodkin both left to start a new studio.
So, ironically, what he may have been concerned about happening still ended up happening, but it was directly because of his actions, trying to be a showboater rather than... That's funny.
Campo Santo.
Oh, wait, hang on. Isn't this the studio that made Firewatch? I remember people having trouble with the ending of the game, but I remember there being some brouhaha when PewDiePie played it a while back. Am I remembering? Is that correct? I have to go digging on that.
Putting out the critically acclaimed Firewatch.
Yep, I was right. Okay, I remember there being some brouhaha around this, as I think it was a mixed success, because I think people compared it to a walking simulator and had all sorts to say on that count, with them there generally being an okay story, although I think there was some concern over how it ended. Although the problem is that you then have the usual discourse over walking simulator, and I believe Firewatch also released around the time the culture war really got brought into gaming, so that would make it even more contentious.
3 years later, in 2014, Hines went to co-found a new studio called Night School, who put out one of my personal favorite games of all time, Oxenfree. Both of these games...
Okay, I've heard good things about Oxenfree, so that one I believe is more of a traditional point-and-click or adventure game. I believe there was a big deal about an ARG with all sorts of external stuff unrelated, well, outside of the game itself, so fair enough.
Had similar elements to Telltale Games, in that they were narrative-driven with a heavy emphasis on decision-making, but they were also innovative in ways that Telltale Games were not. And in the coming years, it would become clear that Telltale was being left behind as the game industry was moving forward. One of the big sticking points was the game's engine, the Telltale tool. Kevin Brunner was the one who designed the engine way back in 2005. Since then, 2 generations of game consoles had come and gone.
And we give Bethesda crap for the Creation Engine, damn.
And the engine was
though I'm pretty sure Creation Engine's older, but you get the point.
Becoming increasingly limiting and inefficient. Employees begged him to switch over to something more modern, like Unity or Unreal Engine. But
to be fair, I'd be reticent to let go of the internal tool as well if it's been working for that long. Well, for that long, although... And to be fair, that's what you run into with a lot of cases where you risk losing some of the uniqueness if you move over to the off-the-shelf options, but you don't necessarily have the resource to recreate or modernize the current ones. So, yeah, with respect to that, I can be sympathetic to both sides because there's never really a good answer. In fact, the company I most recently worked for has a system to manage patient transactions that is literally older than me, running COBOL. And they tried to replace it once, and it was a multi-million, I think maybe even billion-dollar disaster that led to a lot of people getting laid off because it just ended up not working the way it needed to. Because it's very easy to start with a simple system and add the complexity as you go and then have trouble replacing it, than it is to start with the complex system that you have to recreate. You're seeing something similar play out with Linux if you ever look at X11 versus Wayland.
But were continually met with the same stonewall replies. It would take months to switch over, during which...
Yep, and that is a legitimate concern that you would have to figure out a way to properly integrate it into your workflow, and you would have to take a hit in the moment, and that is an unenviable decision to be in, but at some point you reach diminishing returns where the pain of switching over is lesser than the pain of dealing with the current circumstance. Although, devil you know versus devil you don't.
Which time they wouldn't be able to work. The Telltale tool is what gives Telltale Games their identity. Most of these just sounded like excuses because Brunner wanted his tool to be the one the games were made on, and
that is also a fair concern.
everyone just had to resign themselves to using the archaic engine. It didn't help that Telltale were also in charge of multiple billion-dollar IPs.
And that is what looked like that's what looked like done them in from an outsider looking in.
The pressure to deliver for Game of Thrones what they did for The Walking Dead meant that Brunner was strongly against taking any risks whatsoever. He wanted to keep rehashing the same thing over and over with a fresh coat of paint,
Which means that they ended up being stifled and not doing all that much not doing what they should have been doing.
trying to emulate The Walking Dead in a new context. This approach was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it meant brands got exactly what they were asking for, but it also meant that all of their games started to feel the same. The first time you're faced with a decision that will permanently kill a character, it's shocking. The 10th time, it's predictable. Pretty quickly, Telltale started seeing a decline in sales. With a studio of 300 employees and multiple game licenses to pay for, Brunner couldn't afford to let things slip away. He had to turn things around quickly. So, his solution was to work his employees to the bone. He wanted more games, faster turnaround, higher output. Telltale went from working on 1 or 2 games simultaneously to working on 3 or more.
Jeez, I was right on all of those. Jeez, how do I still have all this knowledge? Jeez, this is what I get for actually, this was about the time I started keeping a pretty close track on the industry, or at least a few years prior, so even if I didn't play any of the games directly.
More. To get everything done, Brunner began crunching his employees relentlessly. 5-day work weeks stretched to 6 or 7. 8-hour days increased to 12 or more. The work culture at Telltale Games became one of the most toxic in the industry, and there was a constant churn of veterans leaving the company only to be replaced by junior developers and writers fresh out of school. These new employees didn't have the same experience as those they were replacing, but they were naive enough to accept the 80-hour work week as normal.
And unfortunately, that then leads to a decline, which means the sales keep hitting and you're just in a downward spiral, just trying to stop the bleeding. Well, putting a band-aid on a broken bone, basically.
Unfortunately, the increased output resulted in Telltale oversaturating their own market. They were putting out so many games for so many different IPs, there was no way for sales to keep up. The games were still fairly good, but people can only play so many games at a time. An increased release schedule can't fix that. To top things off, other adventure games like Life is Strange were taking the genre in exciting new directions, while Telltale was stuck rehashing the same formula over and over.
Well, I mean, people would dispute the Life is Strange bit, but to be fair, if you're into adventure games, that probably would be more up your alley, but there is a certain crowd that finds Life is Strange cringe, especially the later ones.
The result was a team of increasingly inexperienced creatives being worked to the bone, forced to put out suboptimal games before they were finished. The pot came to a boil in 2017, when the tension between Brunner, the employees, upper management, and Telltale's board of directors bubbled over. Brunner was politely asked to step down from his position and left the company later that year. In the aftermath of his departure came a sort of bliss. One source says, quote, "I didn't realize how much we had learned to hold ourselves back from thinking big. We'd really been trained to think small, and realizing that was a freeing experience." But the honeymoon wouldn't last long. In September of 2017,
Wait, Zynga? Oh no. Oh, no. Yep, you're done. You're done.
Pete Hawley, former SVP and GM of games at Zynga, was named the new CEO, and he immediately laid off 25% of the company. To be fair, those working at the company didn't really hold it against him. Many believed the layoffs were inevitable, the result of years of mismanagement, and a logical correction after the company aggressively scaled up back in 2013. Despite the layoffs, things seemed like they might actually be looking up for Telltale. Hawley decided to switch off the Telltale tool and began moving development over to the Unity engine.
Okay, so for a simple or smaller scale game, that Unity works. It's not as if you're having to render a bunch of stuff or complex inventories, so Unity would be perfectly acceptable.
Announced a few new projects, and many hoped they could recapture the same lightning in a bottle they did with their earlier releases. However, on September 21st, 2018, everyone got blindsided. Telltale was shutting down. Most of the employees didn't know what hit them. They received an email about a meeting in the morning, and at that meeting, they were told to pack up all their belongings and vacate the building immediately. Apparently, Minecraft Story Mode Season 2 and Batman Enemy Within didn't sell well enough to justify keeping the lights on, and those in charge decided to shut it all down. Telltale would keep on a skeleton crew of 25 employees to finish any active projects like The Walking Dead final season, while everyone else was being let go. In the aftermath, people began taking legal actions. Fernie Roberts filed a class action lawsuit after the company closed with less than a day's notice, no severance, and without filing for bankruptcy, all of which were in violation of California's WARN Act.
Oof, that's gonna cause them all sorts of trouble.
Kevin Bruner sued the company for financial damages after being forced out by the board of directors. It was a hot mess of finger pointing, but at the end of the day, it was the end of an era. Despite doom and gloom surrounding the Telltale Games specifically, there is still a hunger for the kinds of games Telltale was known for. Several ex-Telltale employees, including Nick Herman, Denis Lennart, and Pierre Choret, recently put out a new game called Dispatch.
And that's what motivated me to check out this video, and that's presumably, given when this was released, yeah, I think that correlates pretty closely with when Dispatch came out. I'd have to check though.
Which took the internet by storm. It has a similar framework to those old Telltale games, but it also has tons of new features that make it feel fresh in 2025. Peaking at more than 130,000 concurrent players on Steam in its first week is proof that narrative-driven adventure games still have a place in modern gaming. You just have to be willing to innovate, and also work with the cast of Critical Role.
Well, depending on the circumstances, that could be a double-edged sword as well, because, I mean, you hear those voice actors in everything and not always where they should be. You really should have brought back Jim Cummings for Minx, that's all I'll say, but...
The story of Telltale Games is a cautionary one, remembering that great games are not the result of one person, but many. If those writers who made The Walking Dead and The Wolf Among Us had been given the room to be creative, to try new things and experiment, who knows if Telltale could have survived a little longer. Unfortunately, ego got in the way, and yet another great studio fell to the wayside.
Well, either way, there's always the rise and fall. There's always tales like this. Nothing is good because it lasts forever. Either way, that is where we will call it for tonight then. So, fascinating stuff. Thank you all for the suggestions. If you have any more suggestions, there is a section in the Discord server explicitly dedicated to where you can toss stuff for either a video, for either one of these live reactions, or if it really annoys me, it might prompt me to do a video response. Although, at the moment, well, let's see, I wonder if this will happen to Jay. I mean, time comes for all of us. It's just a matter of whether we're ready to handle it gracefully. Although, usually we're not when we get that old, but either way. Speaking of which, so, let's go ahead and talk logistics, as it's been a while since I sat down to live stream, so I guess the short version as to what you can broadly expect, I don't know yet. So, the main reason why there hasn't been much output either here or on the review channel has been due to job instability on my side. So, I found out a couple months ago that I was being laid off by my company, and that layoff has as of yesterday taken effect. So, I'm having to make that my primary focus as of right now. This is not a cry for help. I have the financial resources to weather this for quite a while if I have to, and am prepared to engage in this in the long haul. Although, funnily enough, I've been talking about making a video game for a long time, and about a week before I got news that my job was no longer stable, I had actually started putting idea to code, so it's probably not something I should bank on. Though, I mean, there's only so many hours in the day that you can go job hunting, so it'll give that, I think, is going to be a major focus for me going forward. And at least for this week, I'll probably need to make sure that I'm spending enough time on that, making sure that I get a good cadence going for job hunting, networking, all that fun stuff, alongside still working on the game in order to ensure that, hey, all else fails, at least you can throw this onto Steam. Though, I guess the question is, can I get what I have in mind done in a year? That'd be quite the pace I'd need to work at. Although, the idea I have is a little complex on the back-end side, and it would be a bit CPU heavy with how I've set it up, but I guess the problem is, would I be able to get enough polish? Well, there's a lot that I would need to think about in order for it to reach that. I don't believe it'll reach that point, although I suppose time will tell. Either way, as a result of this, even if things go smoothly and I find another job tomorrow, things will not be returning exactly to as they were, though since that I do have more time now, it's not as if I am going to be completely neglecting YouTube, because I still want to keep working on the Fire Emblem Engage review. I've got another idea. I've got a bunch of stuff over here that I need to work on. There's the stuff I haven't finished already with respect to Xenoblade 3 that still needs to be done. There's the video essay I keep talking about, which I need to shut up about until it's actually ready at this point. And I've got another idea for another one that might be fun. But it's not as if I am bereft of ideas, but at the moment, YouTube is very much a hobby, and I need to treat it as such in favor of something more important. So we'll see how it ends up working out in the long term, but for now at least, who knows? Maybe I can meld them to an extent by showing off some of what I'm doing. Though I have heard some devs express concern that, hey, you post what you're doing with respect to game dev on YouTube or just on social media in general, some brat will come along and vibe code it and post it on Steam a week later. So I don't know how much I'd be able to share, but it's not as if there's a lot of attention being paid to this channel anyway, so unless it went viral or something, I'd be fine. Although even then, the story itself would also go viral, so no telling. Regardless, something to consider as far as the weekly schedule. I do intend to still at least be maintaining the weekly live streams. I'll keep, well, unless insanity happens like the past couple of weeks where there's just been other stuff happening, like being busy one week and then a thunderstorm knocking out power at my house on the one time I had the following week. Apart from random nonsense like that disrupting my schedule, I do intend to at least maintain the weekly stream over here. So we are currently playing through Fallout, the original one, and I'll be doing 2 streams of that and then 1 stream of catching up with the React backlog since I let that get out of control. So we'll keep going on that cadence. I may throw an occasional extra in there, either doing game dev, one-off, other such, partially because, one, I'll have more time for it in theory, especially assuming that I can get a good cadence going for what matters most, and also because, Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave on September. I better get the job situation sorted before then, because that game is going to consume my life if I give it half a chance. I'll need to be very careful about when I'm allowed to play it. Oh boy. Hopefully it's good, but you never really know. 3 Houses I really liked, but that was in large part due to the character writing. And I don't think it's the same writers this time around. I found overlap with Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, and I don't think they would have had time for Age of Imprisonment and Fortune's Weave, so we'll see what happens. They do have a world that's been very well fleshed out to work with, so in theory, it won't end the same way, and the gameplay should at least still be good, but I do wonder. So either way, that is future me's problem. For now, I have the other circumstances that I need to see to, so hopefully it goes well. I'm sorry to hear that. This clip will go viral somehow. We'll see what happens. I appreciate the sentiment, though. So, next week then, we will continue our playthrough of Fallout. And then do that for a couple weeks. Keep doing 2 weeks of Fallout, 1 week of something else, usually working through the React backlog, making sure that that's all good to go. We'll clear out what I had wrapped up today. There we go. What should I pull out for the next one? I can't wait to see the new FE. I hope it's good. It better be good. You are not baiting me back to the same world as Fodlan and then being bad without hearing about it. Oh man. That's why you got me to release another 2.5-hour video. Oh, to be fair, I'm already doing that with Engage times 3, but shh. Either way, I've rambled enough. So, is there anything more I need to see to? Looks like I've seen to everything else of import with respect to the chat, so we'll go ahead and call it there. So, go ahead and leave it there. As always, thank you all for stopping by. And let's see. If there's anything else you would like me to take a look at, either live here or maybe as a video response, as said before, Discord link in the description. we'll have a section dedicated specifically to React submissions. So feel free to submit anything you like. I do reserve the right to tell you no, but either way, hopefully it'll lead to some interesting stuff. And to be fair, definitely some interesting stuff with respect to technical stuff and character design, so worked out great there. So we'll see what awaits us next time. So 3 weeks from now, I guess. And in the meantime, I'll be back with Fallout next week. So that'll be all from me. Thank you all once again for stopping by, and I will see you all